IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Thursday. That's my dude, Sean Davis from the Lucky Lefty Podcast. I'm Brian Driscoll. And Sean, we're going to talk a little recruiting today, man, because it's June 1st. And what does June mean? June means official visits.
Yeah.
That's what June means. And so Notre Dame is going to kick off their official visit weekend tomorrow with several visitors on campus. Some committed players are going to be on campus. Some uncommitted players are going to be on campus. And then, of course, Sunday, you have a big safety visitor arriving. There's going to be another important safety visitor in the middle of the week. There's going to be a running back in the middle of the week. And then the next 2 weekends are going to be huge. And, Sean, the month is big for – it's always a big month for all teams, right? But for Notre Dame especially, I think this month is going to determine whether this is a good class and whether this is like you're kind of keeping things moving forward. It's not a great year nationally. 2024 class is not a great year. It's not a loaded year. There's some good depth to some places, but, you did a nice job. You loaded up on offense. Your defense is okay, but, man, wait till 2025.
Yeah.
Or are you going to look at this class and say, this is a gap-closing class? This class helps continue to move the needle. That is going to be determined by how well the month of June goes. It doesn't mean kids have to commit in June. It doesn't mean that they have to commit in July right after the June visits are over. It just means these are the kind of visits, and the success from these visits are going to put Notre Dame in position to when push comes to shove, they're going to get the signatures. If they don't have success in June, it's going to be very, very hard for this class to be as good as it's capable of being. And that's really what's at stake, Sean, these next 3 to 4 weekends for Notre Dame.
And this year, every recruiting class, it's like a different fabric, right? Remember your grandmother used to put together the quilts and, different designs and everything. That's almost like every recruiting class. It's just put together. It flows different. Each class is different. You talked about the depth of this class. 2025 seems to have pretty much depth at a lot of positions that are going to help Notre Dame, particularly at the defensive line and rush and Viper. So you start to make decisions in the 24 class as far as jumping out on certain guys and saying, is it more beneficial to wait until the 25 class for this position or for this guy? So with them making 25 offers right now, Irish Invasion coming up, there's a lot of things going on that culminate with the official visits. The vibe this year, in my opinion, is just like the fabric of the recruiting class. It's totally different. I can remember last year this time, it seemed like there was so much momentum for Notre Dame going into the month of June. And you just felt like, okay, it's a bug. You felt there were a bunch of commitments coming. That was the vibe going into June. This year, it's a different vibe, but still very much the same opportunity for Notre Dame to really lock in and make a really big imprint with 4 or 5 guys that are keys to close out this class and make it one of the best classes in the nation. And I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those individuals later in the show. But nothing's changed, right? Either way, regardless of how you feel going into June, the job is to put your best foot forward as a program on these visits and hit home runs with all of the kids that come in. So they have a task that's set before them, and we'll see how they do. It's funny sitting here because I think last June, the word is we were so excited to get to the visits because we knew where they sat or how we felt where they sat with a lot of the kids.
It was closing time, Sean.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. Like when you look at last year's class, I think the momentum thing that you brought up is perfect because it was, okay, you've got Christian Gray coming on campus. You've got Jaden Greathouse coming on campus. You've got I'm actually we'll just pull the list up right here and just kind of go through the guys that they had on campus last year for summer visits. You had Rico Flores made his visit in June. It was closing that one down. It was you had Jaden Osbury, Christian Gray, Jaden Greathouse, Jeremiah Love, Joe Otting, Micah Bell, Charles Jagasol was coming at the end of the month, and you felt like you were either the leader or like right in that top group for all those kids.
Yeah.
In the month of June was gonna seal the deal for all those visitors, and it did. And you look at the month of June and July last year, they landed their first commitment of the month was Joe Otting on June 7th. You got Jagasol on June 30th, and then they had that week in July where it was like at the end of June and July, where it was like Jagasol, Bell, Rico, Christian Gray all committed like within a 5-day period.
Yeah.
And then Jaden Greathouse commits like 2 weeks later, and your class is like, wow, okay, you're in
Yeah.
great shape now. And then, of course, you also had the Irish Invasion and the summer camp where Ben Minich comes on campus, lights it up. The staff loves him. And then they make a push for him in August, and they're going to have those same camps this year as well. Although this year there's a lot more 25 kids and 26 kids on the Irish Invasion expected to come for the camps and different things this year. But, those visits were crucial. You didn't get Jeremiah Love until October, but that visit basically made you the leader. And you never lost it. And it's sometimes it's that, like, I don't expect Elijah Rushing to commit on July 3rd if he loves his Notre Dame visit, but this is the kind of visit that could put them in position where they get him down the road. And that's what makes this month so important, Sean. And what's also interesting is the offense and defense are looking at this two completely different ways, right? The offense is, let's put the finishing touches on all of our skill stuff, but it's very important for the offensive line. The secondary or the defense, it's okay, you've got to have success everywhere, right? I mean, but there's also going to be a little bit of an incomplete this June with the defensive line because Justin Scott, as of right now, is not going to be on campus this summer. Yeah. So it's very interesting, the dynamic that both of these sides of the ball are looking at, Sean. But the one thing that cannot be disputed is if they don't crush it in June, this class is going to have a harder time. It's not impossible because if they go out there and light the world on fire and, whoop Ohio State and whoop Clemson and USC and they're a playoff team, they'll be able to recover. But you put yourself in a really tough spot to where if you don't really knock it out of the park this June, it's going to make it a lot harder for them to close with the kind of class that we talk about this, right? Stacking those classes on top of each other. They're somewhat doing that. This is as long as they keep everybody on offense, Sean. This is another gap closing skill class. Mm-hmm. So you've got 2 in a row. You stacked 2 defensive classes in a row in the front 7 in the 22 and 23 classes. The secondary class in 2022 was not great. You had pretty darn good corners, but no safeties. And then obviously this past year, you had pretty darn good corners again, good safety class. So there's some areas where, if you don't finish well here, you're not going to have the stacking on top of each other the way that we talk about, the way that they need. Offensive line, they got to finish strong. Receiver, just keep doing what you're doing, right? Running back, another strong class, but you want to get that second guy, another talented quarterback. So this month is going to be super important for Notre Dame. Offensively, Sean, let's talk offense because as we mentioned, the skill positions is kind of like, okay, you're adding some extra, some really cherry on top type of players, right? The one position where that's not true is up front. This is a very important month for Notre Dame when it comes to offensive line recruiting. There are going to be likely questions about Joe Rudolph as a recruiter with this class for a number of reasons. The Anthony Knapp decision, not going after certain guys like Liam Andrews and Caleb Brewer and players like that. Yeah. But this month gives him a chance to kind of slow down some of that because it's an interesting conversation because I don't know that I would say Joe Rudolph is doing a bad job, a good job. I really don't know what kind of job he's doing. There's just so little discussion with some of the top guys on the board. We're going to find out if he can connect with Gearby Lambert. And I'll tell you a concern that I had. I was reading an interview somebody sent me that because Gearby Lambert just doesn't talk. I mean, he won't talk to us. He doesn't talk to hardly anybody. But there was an article he did with somebody. Can't remember who it was or what network is with. But he's talking about his favorite schools, and he talks about Penn State and how much he likes their offensive line coach and Ohio State and their offensive line coach and Michigan and Sharon Moore. And then he gets to Notre Dame, and it was all about the O-line tradition, all about the school, not a peep about Joe Rudolph. Yeah. Now, one of two things happened is he answered questions that he was asked and about Notre Dame, and it wasn't asked necessarily about Joe Rudolph, perhaps. Or B, right now, Gearby doesn't have the connection with Joe Rudolph that he has with others. Well, this is your chance to fix that when you get him on campus. And so this is then there's you got Styles Prescott visiting early in the month. Right now, Grant Bricks hasn't scheduled a visit. So you're pretty much at the point where it's Prescott, Lambert, or bust at the present moment. And we're gonna find out about the ability of Joe Rudolph to close on this thing, because here's the reality of it. There's two sides to this. One is it's not a great offensive line class. And so it's a year where I'm not necessarily going to have a full evaluation on Joe Rudolph the way that I did about Al Washington last year, where you step in the door and you've already got Keon in the class and Brendan Vernon in the class, and you're the leader for Jason Moore and you're the leader for Devin Houston. And it's like, just don't screw it up, right? This was a year where it was similar to that, where you were considered the leader for, Caleb Brewer, you were considered the leader for Styles Prescott, you were considered the leader for Gearby Lambert because of Harry Heastand. Now it's like, okay, this is a different animal, because offensive linemen are so much about relationships more than any other position. But it's also not a good year where if you miss some of those guys, you can turn to a Sullivan Absher, a Sam Pendleton, a Joe Wadding. There just aren't as many of those guys in this class. So this month is for Joe Rudolph is going to tell us a lot. It's not going to tell us the full picture, but if he's going to have to close on Styles Prescott and make Notre Dame a player for Gearby Lambert again, if he wants to avoid some of the not happiness, I guess, unhappiness of Notre Dame faithful when it comes to offensive line recruiting.
Yeah, which goes to what you just talked about. Like, you always give room to an incoming coach for their preference within their position room, to look at those that might be in the class, or those that might be having offers that might, be at the top of the wish list. And for those guys to say, you know what, I actually like somebody better than this particular individual. You mentioned the Anthony Knapp thing with Caleb Brewer. I think we would probably disagree looking at the film on the two young men, but he's the new offensive line coach. You give him that room,
right,
when he walks in to say, look, this is what I want to establish. I like this,
because he had conviction with it, right?
He had conviction. Absolutely.
Okay.
He had conviction with it. So, you ride out with that. Now, when it comes to Styles Prescott and Gearby Lambert, and remember, you said it, Gearby talked his sophomore year a little bit, and then it seems like as things got on, he just shut it down. And early on, his original conversation was how much he enjoyed Notre Dame, and he was very well aware of Harry Heastand and what he's done at Notre Dame with the offensive lineman. Now, Harry Heastand is not there. You talked about the relationship Joe Rudolph has to build with him, and that's going to come up against this official visit. But let me tell you, one of the things that always stands out with offensive linemen when they visit Notre Dame, it's the time with with the offensive line coach, but then it's the time that they get locked in with that group. That group moves around totally different than any other group on the Notre Dame football team.
And along those lines, Sean, just to let everybody know, the Notre Dame players, the veterans report this week. Some of the freshmen won't be here, like Charles Jagasaw won't be here. I don't think that's necessarily needed for Styles Prescott because he's already been on campus and around those guys, but everybody will be on campus and into their summer routine by the time Gearby Lambert shows up in 2 weeks, which is important.
Absolutely. So that is, and what did Charles Jagasaw tell us? It wasn't about what went on with the starters. It was the way the second string was coached. It was the way the second string was taught. It was the togetherness of the group that stood out for him. Gearby Lambert's going to have some of the same concerns, and that's going to be a benefit. And now, the one thing that has to take place is that Joe Rudolph has to establish a relationship. But I believe, based upon what we've heard, just through the process of him getting the job, when he gets the okay from that O-line room to say, you know what, he might not be Harry Heastand, but we rock with him. We rock with the way he talks to us. We rock with his vibe as a coach. That makes me feel good about his ability to continue the legacy at Notre Dame. We know his track record, that he can take 2 stars, 3 stars at other schools and turn them into NFL offensive linemen. He can develop. We know that. This is big time college football in Notre Dame. Can you close the deal with some of the best offensive linemen in the country? This is his opportunity to pass that test this June, and we'll see if he comes through with flying colors, B. Hopefully he does, but we'll have to wait and see.
That's a great point, Sean, about the players, because that is one thing we've heard a lot of good things about, is the players seem to really connect with Joe Rudolph. And again, this isn't they didn't like Harry Houston. They didn't. It's just each one is a different situation.
Yeah.
And because you like Harry doesn't mean you can't like Joe Rudolph. Ideally, you want them to connect with him as well, and they have from everything that we've heard.
Yeah.
And so I think that's going to help them in that regard. And I think the other thing that is a bit of an issue for Joe Rudolph is the fact that this isn't a great offensive line year. It's really not. We've been saying this for, the entire 2023 and even late in 24 when we first started watching the film. So it's one of those things where if you can't get a guy because that relationship isn't there, because you're new here, it's harder to say, well, who's your backup plan?
Yeah.
Because there aren't the same quality backup plans. And when you look at how loaded 2025 is, you almost get to the point where, like, Notre Dame's got a lot of dudes on their current roster slated to come back. The 25 class so far looks really good offensive line-wise, nationally and in the Midwest, with it's favorable to Notre Dame. You almost get to the point where if you don't get Gearby, you've got to get one of Prescott and Lambert just to get your numbers needs. But then you say, well, if you can't get Lambert, then what do you do? Well, what you do is you just keep recruiting him and the guys that you view top of the board guys. And if you flip them later, great. If you can't, It is what it is. You move on. But that's basically what he's facing this year. But these June visits, Sean, are going to be huge. And it's the player aspect's great, but this is a chance for Rudolph to really kind of show his chops as well, to get these kids on campus. None of these kids are going to be working out for him this summer, so it's not like he's going to get a chance to do that. But he's going to have a lot of 25 kids on campus for the Lineman Challenge this weekend.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be, okay, now can he connect with those kids the way, and then, prove in 25 that what you did in 24 is more about the circumstances than it is about your ability as a recruiter. And that's what he's going to have to prove. But this month of June is going to be big for that. Because if you can at least get Styles Prescott, Sean, look, I like Styles Prescott as a player. I do. I think he's a good player. I think he's tall. I think he's long. He's got a nice frame. I think he's got, some decent pop, although he's going to need a lot of weight room strength. You can look at him and tell he's not a guy that's like just a part of just absolutely killing in the he's not Braxton Cave, right? He's not just, doing what Braxton Cave did in the weight room coming out. He doesn't have Charles Jagasol's size,
right?
But he's going to be an easy 300 pounds, and he's a good athlete. He's got long arms. He just doesn't know how to use his talent yet. I've had people say to me, well, he doesn't bend really well. And I said, well, I agree. His film, he doesn't bend well that often, but it's one of those things but you see him bend at times. And to me, it's a technique thing. Yeah. That's what you always have to evaluate. If a guy doesn't show you something, is it an athletic limitation or is it a technical aspect of it? Well, with Styles Prescott, I think it's more of a technical thing. Yeah. He's a quality top 250 caliber player. He's not, adding him would allow you to say, okay, I'm comfortable with where they're at. They got 2 guards. They didn't get the tackle they needed. That's a little bit of a concern. Maybe they can go to the portal next year if push comes to shove and they lose Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. They can go to the portal maybe and fill the needs there, But I think that they're going to be okay as long as they load up in 25. So getting Styles Prescott allows you to get to your needs. We've said all along, 3, and they'll go to 4 if it's the right 4.
Yeah.
So Styles Prescott at least gets you to your numbers needs overall, but it's going to leave a little bit of a problem because tackle is going to be a very shaky area for Notre Dame the next couple of years.
I'm glad you said that. That's why these visits are important more than anything. We're very well aware of the possibility of losing minimum 1 tackle after this season, maybe 2 starting tackles. So with that, you feel like Tosh Baker and why am I drawing a blank? He's one of my favorite kids that I love to watch in the offensive line. Can't
Talking
gain
about
the weight.
Caleb Johnson.
Caleb
Talking about that.
Johnson.
Yeah,
And
the kid that's now at heading to SMU, right? Yeah.
right. Look, we understand what's taking place, and the depth is probably not what you thought it would be. Charles Jackensaw, however, is the type of kid that he comes back. He gives you a little bit of flexibility, right? Because he can play 4 to 5 positions on the offensive line. So you need him to start off inside. He can start off inside and then move to outside to the tackle position when
Emil
needed.
Wagner. I don't know why I
Emil
said Caleb
Wagner.
Johnson.
Yeah, Emil
Sorry.
Wagner is the person I was talking about. So, you got Emil and you have Tosh Baker. You're probably going to get Blake Fisher back more than likely, unless
One of
he
those
just,
two, yeah.
unless Blake just comes out and just wows everybody.
Which is the concern, because that could happen.
That could happen. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if that's the case, it's a blessing, right? Because now you're sitting there as Notre Dame saying, you know what? We're Notre Dame. We produce offensive linemen, and we just produced 2 first-round tackles. There you go. Nothing sells better than that on the recruiting trail. We got 2 first-round tackles. Now at 25 and 26, you're going in and you're talking to these kids. It's a very attractive situation. But now you're probably going to be looking at a very young, inexperienced offensive line coming back. And then that yields itself to the strength of Joe Rudolph, which is his teaching and his development.
Yeah.
So, it can work out. But like you said, that tackle position, it would be great if that happened and you had Prescott and Gerby Lambert coming in. Now you're cooking with grease.
And the issue isn't just next year, because incoming freshman isn't really going to have an impact in 2024. It's more also concerning to where in 25, you're not going to have Tosh Baker in 25. You're not going to have Blake Fisher in 25. And now it's going to be Emil Wagner and guys from the 23 and 24 classes.
Right.
And that's where you came up short at tackle. Now, if Charles Jackensaw ends up being that guy, then you're okay. But again, we've seen guys get injured, and that's the issue that you come into. They're almost to the position where if they don't get Gerby Lambert, they're going to be forced to either next year or the year after look at the portal,
the transfer portal,
for a tackle, at the very least for depth.
Yep.
And that's just not where you want to be. That's not where you want to be, and that's why a guy like Gerby Lambert is so important. If you were to ask me today, do I think Notre Dame's going to get Gerby Lambert? My answer would be no. I don't think they're going to get Gerby Lambert. But again, what's the whole point of the show, Sean? That's why the June visits are so important.
Absolutely.
Let's talk also. There's one particular player coming on campus this weekend. Notre Dame is pretty much set at receiver. They are not really recruiting any receivers. One of the questions that we had earlier was, is Jason Robinson still a guy that Notre Dame is pushing for? Is he a priority for Notre Dame? He is not. That's why you don't see him on the official visit list for June. Notre Dame has moved on there. I think they're comfortable with where they are. They want to use that extra scholarship at other places, and one of those is on a number 2 tight end, not because they won a number 2 tight end, but because they saw 2 guys that they just thought were too good to pass up. They thought about passing them up. They decided not to take those guys instead of a 4th receiver. It basically came down to, do you want Jason Robinson as your 4th receiver? Do you want to try to get Jaden Riddell or Carter Nelson as your number 2 tight end? And they basically decided they were going to go with those 2 tight ends.
Yeah.
And obviously Jaden Riddell is committed to Georgia. He will not be visiting this summer. So obviously he's not there. But now you've got Carter Nelson slated to visit this summer. He is supposed to be on campus next weekend. Notre Dame is doing very well there, but it's going to be a hard close. This is going to be a really big visit for him, because I think every time Notre Dame has been able to be around Carter Nelson or his family or get to his school, they've really been able to make ground up with Nebraska and some other schools that I think are also there. This is going to be that weekend where it's like, okay, let's really see if you can close the deal here with that kid. And so I think that's going to be a very important visit for Notre Dame when they get Carter Nelson on campus next weekend, because he's one of those, again, if you don't get him, you're okay at tight end. If you do get him, boy, you're really, really loaded at tight end.
One of the benefits of having the guy that was recruiting him from the jump all of a sudden become the offensive coordinator as well is what Jared Parker, who has been out to see him in the middle of nowhere multiple times. Ryan Roberts has talked about that trip and, the commitment that Jared Parker has put into his recruitment by making that trip multiple times. So to get the young man on campus with his family, extremely athletic, have yet to see him play, a full complement of football, 11 on 11. But like you said, the athleticism, the talent, and having him, CJ Carr played with Riddell 7-7 a little bit in the spring. So, at some point in time, we thought, man, maybe Riddell might end up at Notre Dame. But it's just wonderful to see because we talked about this. I want to say 2 or 3 months ago, Ryan and I were doing the show, and we were really contemplating would they even take a second tight end. And we were saying we hope that they open that door to take a second tight end because Carter Nelson was the one that we really liked, and we knew that Jared Parker had the greater relationship with and had been out to see. So if you get him on campus and you continue to build that relationship, I really think, Nebraska, we knew would always be at the forefront in this thing. I think the Dylan Raiola situation and the quarterback situation with that class, I don't know how much it impacted it, but Matt Rule's going to have Nebraska in it. I think Michigan is sniffing
then
around.
Georgia's not, Georgia got Raiola, and obviously they were one of the schools going after Carter Nelson. They got Jaden Riddell. I want to real quick. People saying if Notre Dame maybe didn't stop recruiting Jaden Riddell for a minute, they might have stopped him from getting him in Georgia. No, that's part of the reason they started to back off of him for a minute. And the only reason that they really got back in it was because of his relationship with CJ Carr. But that had more to do with Jaden Riddell than it had to do with Notre Dame. I don't want to get into it, but that's look, I'll gladly criticize the staff when they make missteps in the recruiting trail. That's not one. And again, I'm not going to get into it, but that's not one. But with Carter Nelson, like you said, Sean, he brings Jaden Riddell, I think, is the better player today. But I think Carter Nelson has arguably the highest ceiling, one of the 2 highest ceilings in the class as a tight end.
Jaden Riddell is more polished right now. He's the more
I don't
polished
know how much better he's going to get. He's a good player, but I think Carter Nelson, the upside bet is the one that I think they're going to do. The other position that Notre Dame is going to really get decided this summer is running back. Now there are 3 running backs slated to visit this spring. This in June. Anthony Carey was supposed to visit next weekend. He's now going to go to Michigan State. I don't think his visit is going to get rescheduled because I think their running back class is going to come down to the 2 kids coming over the next week. This weekend, Kedron Young from Texas is going to be on campus, and then the middle of the week, Xavier Robinson from Oklahoma is going to be on campus. I think those are the 2 guys right now that Notre Dame is prioritizing, not just because they're the 2 best players, because I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's just that, as we've said all along with Anthony Carey, he likes Notre Dame, but he was never in love with Notre Dame to the degree that other kids were, which is why he never visited before the summer. And so I think when you look at it, I think it's a situation where one of these 2 kids, I think, is where they're going to go. And one of these 2 bigger backs, Kedron Young, to me, is the guy that I hope that they get. Absolutely. I just don't know. I don't know if this staff is going to be patient enough to wait on him because he's going to visit. I was talking to Kedron the other day. He listed like 6 or 7 schools that he still wants to visit. However, that means this weekend you got a chance to knock it out of the park. And if you can absolutely knock it out of the park and let him know, like, hey, we got a kid visiting next week that we think we might be able to get here soon. What's your interest level really? And I think that's going to determine it. So that we could start getting some clarity at the running back position over the next week with these 2 visits from Kedron Young and Xavier Robinson.
I love what Dylan McCullough is doing. I remember we talked to him when he joined the staff. He talked about developing that running back room and having different types of backs to do different things, having 4 different types of backs. And he's at a place now, even with the loss of Logan Diggs from a recruiting standpoint, where he can start to do that. And he can say, you know what, we like this kid, but we already have that type of kid in the room. So let's bypass. We don't have a Kedron Young in the room. Some of the things he can do. Love that kid. We don't have an Anthony Carey. So let's focus on those kids because they will come in and give something to the room that we don't currently have, especially with Chris Tyree now moving to the wide receiver room. So you have to love where the running back room is from a depth standpoint and how they can be a little picky, if we can say that, and go after certain kids that they want. Will they wait? They waited on Jeremiah Love, but that's apples to oranges. That's apples to
Right.
oranges because I
He
think
was
they knew
the
they were
dude.
leading. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was the dude. Absolutely. And I think they knew they were at the top for him, so they were willing to wait. Kedron Young is the one that I would take out of the two without question.
Mm-hmm.
And me personally, I would be willing to wait. But like you said, if Anthony Carey comes to campus in June, it's like, yo, I'm ready.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have a dilemma. Because like you said, Dylan McCullough likes both of these young men.
Yeah. And that's gonna get interesting to see how that shakes out. So running back is going to be a very interesting dynamic over the next couple weeks. Let's talk defensive recruiting, Sean, defensive class, because as we said with offense, with the exception of the offensive line, and when I feel great about where they are with Styles Prescott, right? So I think they'll get their third guy sooner rather than later. Just got to close it out this weekend. Then it's just, okay, you're getting that extra running back that you want, that extra tight end that you want. I think now when I look at defense, though, this is the crux of the offensive class, or the base of the foundation of the offensive class is already established, right? The peak is already established. Now it's just getting a little parts around it, right? Defensive class is completely different because you got to finish strong there to have the kind of class that you want. Now, they're off to a good start, but it's not a gap closing start. I like the three ends. I like Logan Thomas. He has a very high ceiling. I love Cole Mullins as a player. He's him and Logan Thomas are right now the number 1 and 2 players in the class for me for Notre Dame. And Bryce Young has the highest upside of anybody in the class. I'm a huge Leonard Moore fan. Kennedy Urlacher has some upside, but he needs time. Carson Hobbs has got some upside, but he needs time. Teddy Rizak has a lot of upside, but he needs time. Bodie Cahoon has a lot of upside. He needs time. There's a lot of those sort of low floor, high ceiling guys in the class so far, Sean. And it's not that you don't really have the guy in the class that right now you look and say, boy, that's a dude that moves the needle. Even as much as I love Leonard Moore, I think he's really good. He's not, I don't grade him as the way that I did Benjamin Morrison, right? Coming out of high school. And you look at some of these linebackers like Teddy Rizak, Bodie Cahoon have a lot of upside. They're not Jaden Alsbury and Drake Bowen now as prospects. And I love Cole Mullins and I love Logan Thomas and I love Bryce Young, but they're not, the big time, oh my gosh, that guy comes in day one and he's going to be a dude kind of players, right? So the finish is going to be the key to how this class goes. Is it a solid defensive class, which does not move the needle? Right. And I think should raise major questions about the talent of this recruiting staff on defense outside of Mike Mickens? Or do you say, okay, they got their sea legs underneath them. Look at how they closed in June. They're okay. Yeah. And that's what this month means, big picture for this defensive staff, Sean. We're going to learn a lot about their ability to be championship caliber recruiters over this next month.
And you could talk about that because what we're seeing in the first 2 years of recruiting from Marcus Freeman and his staff is things being inverted, right? The defense was stacked, and it was the offense trying to play catch up last year as we went into the summertime with the official visits. This year, the offense got the jump early, starting with, they got the offensive trio at the Irish Invasion last summer. Mm-hmm. You can't do any better than that.
And really ended up getting 4 guys from the Irish Invasion because Aeneas eventually committed.
Absolutely.
He pretty much committed that weekend, Sean, but he didn't end up going public until a little later. He sealed the deal that weekend. You had guys like Jordan Marshall on campus that weekend, remember? You had some other top backs, and Notre Dame was like, this Aeneas dude was the best guy they had. Yeah. And they got him. So, a big crux of your offensive class, your skill class was on campus last year for Irish Invasion. It's a great point.
Absolutely. So, man, now you turned up the heat on the offensive class. And in the defensive class, you have the opportunity, in my opinion, with certain individuals in the class to solidify things a little bit earlier, but it doesn't work out that way. And now you're in the midst of the dog days of recruiting in the summer, and certain guys are a dog fight to get them into the class and close things. I will say this. You talk about the linebacker Cole Mullins, I'm right there with you. I love Logan Thomas. But let me tell you something. You had a favorite guy at linebacker in the class last year. And I had a favorite guy at linebacker in the class last year that I covered. And it was when we went to the spring and started hearing these dudes are real, it wasn't a shock to us.
No. And of course, Jaden Osbury for me, Drake Bowen. We both loved both of them, but we just had that, just for whatever reason, that one dude was just that dude.
And they kept dropping. They kept dropping in the rankings, and we heard that they weren't athletic, they weren't fast, and we were like, okay, sure, if you say so. And then all of a sudden we get to the spring, and it's like, oh yeah, these two dudes are real. Not shocking. Kingston is that guy. Yeah. Kingston is the guy that they can get on campus. And if they can lock him in and get him in this class, he's the guy that can come in and be that freshman that we hear about next spring. Coaches talking about, yo, we got another one at the linebacker position. And you start stacking those type of players, you start to change the narrative, which I already think I've said it on several shows. I think the linebacker position, this is the pivot year for linebacker at Notre Dame. I totally think so.
Could you explain that, Sean?
I think J.D. Bertrand is about to have a fantastic year. Mm-hmm. I really do. And I think we're going to get complimentary play from the youngsters that's going to inspire some of the elder statesmen to even be more consistent. And collectively, this is the year the linebacker room starts to give you the production you need at that position to be a championship defense. You know the back end. You know what you have on the back end, right? And you've gotten even better through the transfer portal and even deeper on the back end. I think they have really good talent up front, unproven, but I think their defensive line has an opportunity to be really good. The linebackers can seal the deal for me for this defense and make this defense a top 15, top 10 defense nationally. If they come in and produce the way I feel like they can produce, and it's going to be the mixture of the senior leadership of J.D. Bertrand and some of the youngsters bursting on the scene and making those splash plays and big plays, tackles for losses, creating turnovers, some of the things we haven't seen. But those are the type of things that take your defense to the next level. Malik talked about it yesterday. The only thing really missing from Notre Dame's defense, which has always traditionally been solid, is just the ability to create turnovers and get the ball back to the offense and get more possessions to the offense. So I think this is a year that linebacker position takes that step. And if you can add Kingston via recruiting, we already know they've stacked linebackers. You know, you go from 22, 23, you get Kingston at 24, Cole Mullen, and then go to 25 and get some of the kids they already have in the fold or coming to the Irish invasion. Now you start to change the narrative about linebacker, right? Because linebacker at Notre Dame is what? We get one great one every 3 to 4 years. That's pretty much the narrative. Mm-hmm. We go from Manti, Jalen, Jeremiah Owusu, let me take a step back. Well, yeah, those are the great ones. I think in between that, you've had some really good combinations, the Drew Tranquils, the Niles Morgans, so on and so forth. But just having consistent, great play at the linebacker position, I think Notre Dame has really set itself up with the previous two classes, and then adding in the guys they can get in this class close to the deal to really turn the table at that linebacker position.
Sean, I'm going to say with Kingston, he's clearly the number one linebacker on the board.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's a statement recruitment. It's not just getting a top player; it's getting a top player from a top program nationally and beating Ohio State and USC for him.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it. I will say this though: that's going to tell us a lot about the ability of this staff to get the big boys, to beat the big boys. And I don't have a lot of faith in this defensive staff doing that. And even with Mickens, I mean, he hasn't done that a lot yet either, because he's been so good at finding these kids that that you get on them before anybody else does.
Yeah.
With Leonard Moore, you obviously beat Washington and when Jimmy Lake was there and Nick Saban at Alabama for Benjamin Morrison, so that one was huge. But most of the other kids they've gotten, Christian Gray was one, but Micah Bell wasn't. Jaden Mickey wasn't. So you've at least seen him do it when he needed to. He needed to with Benjamin Morris, and he needed to with Christian Gray, and he got it done. But he hasn't had to do it as much because, again, he gets on Leonard Moore before everybody else just knows who Leonard Moore is. He got on Micah Bell before Micah Bell became a hotter commodity. And so, to me, the rest of the staff has not shown me that they can go toe-to-toe with Ohio State on defense and beat them, that they can go into USC's backyard and get that guy. So that's going to be a big part of this one too. And I think the June visits for Kingston are going to be absolutely huge. They're going to be what determine where he goes, in my opinion. I think he's very torn between Notre Dame and Ohio State. I think he likes different aspects of both. But I think in this instance, it's going to come down to who can have the best closing argument, right? It's like a presidential campaign, right? Like it's really close and the polls are really close and you have that final debate and then that final stretch month, right? It's who's going to leave the best sort of the closing message with the people. Well, that's how it's going to be with Kingston, right? It's who can leave the best closing message for Kingston. I think it's going to be a big, big part of it. I will say this also, however. Landing Kingston is important, but if somehow they're able to get Chris Cole, if they do miss Kingston, I can still live with that because he's got a tremendous ceiling. And I could see him being the Will, Bodie being the Mike, Teddy Rizak being the Rover, and that being a really, really, really good linebacker class. Now, the problem is I think they're in a better position right now with Kingston than they are Chris Cole.
Yeah.
And so with Kingston being the number one target, with him being a guy that they've been on for a couple years now, with him being a guy that I think they have a better shot at, that's why Kingston gets a lot of the conversation. Chris Cole's going to be making his third visit to campus, though, this summer. And I think that can't be overlooked, too, because
that says a lot.
I'll argue this. Kingston is the best linebacker on the board right now. There's no question. He's a very high floor guy. I'll also say this. I don't think there's a linebacker on the board right now that has a higher upside than Chris Cole. And because of the success you had at linebacker the last 2 years, if that's your third guy, from the standpoint of the timing of when they commit, because he'd be either one of those two kids jump up to number one on my board at linebacker, whichever one.
Yeah.
But if that was your third pickup at linebacker, I can live with that. I really can. So a lot of our focus is on Kingston. That's the guy the staff has put the priority on. They've been on it for 2 years. That's the guy I think they have the best shot at. I think it is. I just wanted to add that I think if you get one of those two guys, I think you're loaded. Because I know that right now Chris Cole looks more like a Rover, but when I see that kid's frame, Sean, I think he's going to be a Will like in a heartbeat. I think he's going to blow up, and I think it's going to be hard to keep him outside for more than a spring. You know what I mean? I just really think his future's ultimately inside.
And what would it take? Getting him to 230, 240?
I mean, even 225 at the depending on the strength, because he's a pretty strong kid. Could have him be there. Could he get up to 230, 235? I think he could. I just don't think he necessarily needs to be. With the way that Notre Dame plays, especially the kind of rotation, and he'll have time. Those are the aspects of it that I look at and I say, I just get to the point where I'm just like, look. Yes, Kingston's the guy, and that's a statement win, and it would say a lot about this staff. But if they're able to get Chris Cole, because here's the thing about Chris Cole, 2 months ago, he was a talented kid with a lot of upside and raw kid, but you kind of got on him. Well, now you got to beat the big boys to get Chris Cole. He just visited Georgia. He's at Bama's on him. He's blown up now. Yeah. So that narrative is the same for both of them. I just think right now they have a better shot at getting Kingston than they do Chris Cole. But if they get either one of them, and I think because I don't think they can get Chris Cole without Al Golden doing a good job. I think Al Golden's done a good job a great job with Chris Cole. Al Golden's done a good job with Kingston. But Al Washington, to me, is gonna be the guy. Al Washington and Chad Bowden are the two guys that are going to get the most kind of biggest pats on the back from me if you get Kingston at this point in time. And people are asking if you can take both of them. I don't think that there's room for that right now. If you could find a way to make it happen, I absolutely would take both.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no question.
You add a scholarship to the year.
Yeah,
get both of those kids.
I personally would. I just don't know if their name staff feels that way, Sean. So I don't want to say that they would do that. I don't know. I don't. It's tough numbers wise, but in this era with the portal and all that, I think I'd have a hard time saying no to them. That's just like they've met their numbers at defensive end. They've
Yeah.
3 is all they needed. Well, they're still recruiting Elijah Rushing. Why? Because you don't say no
You
to an
don't say
Elijah
no
Rushing.
to that kid. Yeah.
And so obviously that's going to be a big part of it as well for me, Sean, when you look at the linebacker recruiting. So it's a big month for linebacker recruiting because they're going to have to move on. You need a third linebacker in this class. I don't think you can stay at 2 because of the fact you lost Prince Colley, because you've moved Josh Burnham and Junior Tuihalamaka to defensive end. I don't think you can afford to only get 7 linebackers in a 3-year stretch. That would be tough for me. The only way I could justify that is if you get a 4th safety with one of those safeties having some rover potential. But then you're talking about, you got 2 rovers in this class and only 1 inside backer. So I think you're going to need to get a third linebacker some way, somehow. And if you don't get one of these two guys, and now you're talking about maybe going to getting a Bradley Shaw, this is a nice, solid player. His actually film was really good. He just doesn't have the body that you want and need. Yeah. He's more of like the guys they have, smart, instinctive, quality athlete, just small. And I think that's the problem that I have with Bradley Shaw. And that's kind of the type of player they're going to go if they miss out on the first 2. So so that's kind of where I'm at on this particular situation and why I want to respond. Guys, Bodie Cahoon, whatever you think of him, was a guy the Notre Dame coaching staff has been in love with since they first offered him. He was not a reach. He was not a project. He was a priority recruit on the same level of Kingston and Chris Colt for the Notre Dame coaching staff. So if you're concerned, if you have an issue with them taking those guys too early, Bodie Cahoon is on the same level as those guys. So I see some of the people in the chat talking about that. He was a must-get guy. And Teddy Rizak also plays a completely different position. So I would just kind of chill with that stuff. And then the other thing that you run into with a lot of this stuff, Sean, is there's this, like, how fans view recruiting is not like how recruiting actually works, meaning you don't slow play all these kids in hopes of landing all your ones.
Right.
Because then you don't get your ones and then you don't get your other guys too.
Yeah.
Right. You're not going to probably get both Kingston and Chris Cole. The odds of it are slim. I think there's a greater shot you get neither of them than you get both of them.
Right.
I would say a much stronger shot that you get neither of them than you get both of them. So you don't pass on the other guys that you got on the class in hopes that you may, hit the inside straight and get both of them. Because you could eventually try to make it work if you get both of them. So I would say that's something that I don't know why there's a negative view from some people about Bodie Cahoon, but that guy's a guy he's a good football player. The staff loves him. So, but finishing this month off with those 2 guys is important. Sean, we're gonna do defensive end last. So let's go to safety. And this is the position that has the most on the line for this month, in my opinion, even more so than linebacker, because you're sitting here now with Kennedy Urlacher, who I like, but he's a project. He's a bit of a project, has a lot to learn about the game, is going to need some time, that kind of player. But you've got some guys on the board, Sean, that are needle movers, gap closers. Yeah. I'm talking DeJuan Lane, Bronte Johnson, Davis Andrews, in my opinion, is that kind of guy. Jalen McClain. I don't know where Notre Dame is with all those guys, but you got to get one guy from that group, and I think ideally 2. Then you got some other guys on the board, Paul Menke, Oliver Miles, Marquise Gallegos, who are good football players to different degrees. A guy that's going to be visiting, I was planning on visiting this summer, is Malcolm Ziegler, a guy that I'm very high on, actually. But I don't know where Notre Dame stands with him. Yeah. There's a lot of unknown with the safety position right now. Does Davis Andrews stay in the 24 class? Does he move to 26 and go on a mission? There's some, I think, I've talked to Ryan, I've talked to a couple other people that they're thinking that that's kind of now more to where he's leaning. DeJuan Lane has Notre Dame in his top 5. He likes Notre Dame, but you know who has not set up a visit to Notre Dame yet in the month of June? DeJuan Lane. Jalen McClain set up a visit for the end of the month, but, I mean, the odds of Notre Dame getting Jalen McClain are pretty slim right now. So now you're in a situation where if you don't get Bronte Johnson back on the board, which they did recently, then man, this safety recruiting is really in a tough spot. So I think that's a big thing is the work that Bronte Johnson did in the classroom to be able to put himself back on target with being a Notre Dame prospect is huge for this staff, because I don't know if any of the other Group A guys would be guys that you'd be able to say I think they're going to get, and I think that was big for Notre Dame.
I'm a huge Jalen McClain fan.
Yeah, he's my number one safety.
Oh, he had one of the best junior films. It didn't take long. Maybe took 3 or 4 plays, and I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and get another New Jersey safety the following year, because I love Adon Schubert. So Jalen McClain, for me, last time I spoke to Ryan, I believe last week, wasn't really sure where Notre Dame sat with him. But if this is a visit that could, propel them to the top of the race and get them back in the thick of it, that's vitally important. Even if they have to wait and carry it, close to the fall. In my opinion, he's worth the wait and worth the fight.
Yeah.
You talk about, like you said, Oliver Miles, Gallegos, kids that are not, gap closers as such as Jalen McClain, but they're solid. But this is the thing. That safety position needs a statement in recruiting. And maybe it's just the blessing of what has taken place with Bronte recently academically. That might end up being one of the statements that can happen at the safety position, and maybe you get a combination of a Bronte and Jalen, or Bronte and Oliver Miles, or one of the other guys that's coming in, and then you start to feel a little bit better. Because like you said, Kennedy Urlacher has the opportunity, but he's a project. You're going to have to work with him. He has tools. He has the bloodline. We understand that. But that surefire, it's the same thing we talked about with the linebackers, right? When can we get that guy that comes in at safety and day one, when he steps on the field, everybody's going to be looking around saying, yep, we got us one. We got us one. And trying to find that in this class, I'm right there with you. You have 2 guys that fit that mold, and everybody else is like, I wouldn't say significantly under them, but it's a step down.
For me, I would say there's 4 guys in the class that I view as that caliber player for different reasons. I think Jalen and Dewan. Jalen is my number 1 safety. He's my top safety on the board. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Then I would put Bronte, Dewan Lane, and Davis Andrews in that category with him. But they're my 2 to 4 in any order you want to pick, and for different reasons. The concern I have, Sean, about the safety position in this class is I'm very high on Bronte Johnson as a player. I think Bronte has a lot of talent. I had a chance to watch him up close and personal at the Irish Invasion Camp last year. At the time, some people were considering him more of a receiver. I think that showed me that he is flat out definitely a safety. He's not a natural pass catcher, but more so, that's the negative why he's definitely a safety. But the primary reason why the 2 primary reasons I thought he was a safety, Sean, it really came down to 2 things. Number 1 is he just looks athletically so much more comfortable playing defense. And I think a lot of that has to do with his basketball background. Because I think a basketball background really fits well with the movement, just the physical movements of a safety, much more so than what they do of a wide receiver. The wide receiver's movements athletically are not really similar to a basketball player. A safety's movements basketball players backpedal. They have to change direction quickly. Absolutely. Football players, receivers don't do that. DBs do. He's a guy that I think looks very comfortable playing in the middle of the field. He covers a ton of ground. I just think he's a very natural safety, and that's the side of the ball where he looks the most natural. So to me, when I look at Bronte, he's the one pure center fielder they have on the board.
Long
and
strides.
That's important. That's very important.
Strides, yeah.
Here's the concern though, and this is why I have a little bit of concern about who that number 3 safety is. I'm gonna be concerned about Bronte until he enrolls, even if he visits
Yeah,
Sunday and he
yeah,
commits and all that,
yeah,
just because of
yeah,
what happened with
yeah,
Brandon Hillman.
yeah,
And so to me, I look at it and say, Sean, I'm just that one's gonna make me a little bit nervous.
yeah,
It just is. It's gonna make me a little bit nervous until he enrolls. But I love the fact that the kid's doing the work. I mean, because there's so many schools after him. If Bronte could be like, screw Notre Dame, they want me to do something more in the classroom. They want me to take this class, that class. Screw that. I'm going to go to whatever other school's recruiting him.
That's what stood out to me too, bro.
Yeah.
He didn't have to.
No.
He didn't have to.
No. It's not like his only other option was like Indiana State. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like this is a kid that's got schools after him that are pretty good programs. You know what I mean? And he said, no, but Notre Dame's where I want to be, or at least the school I really want to have a shot to be at. And he went out and put in the work. I mean, Michigan State wants him. Penn State wants him. You know, obviously
yeah,
we know that Purdue wants him. Tennessee's been recruiting him. He's made 3 visits to campus at Ohio State. I mean, you know, this is a kid that's got plenty of people after him. But he said, no, I want to be able to give Notre Dame a hard look. And if in order to do that, I'm going to need to get the work in. So, but I'm just going to be a tad nervous about if they don't get a second Group A guy. I'm
yeah,
just going to be a little bit nervous about the safety class. And I also think that if they don't get a second Group A guy at safety, it's going to tell me it's going to pretty much answer the questions that we need to have answered about Chris O'Leary as a recruiter. And that is that he's just not able to get the job done because the only Group A guy you got from an hour and 15 minutes away, you
yeah,
know, so that's a concern for me too. So I just feel like being able to get DeJuan Lane on campus this summer, or maybe right now, Jalen McClain has not a lot of interest in Notre Dame. But my whole thing with him is he's an interesting kid because I don't think Jalen McClain has a whole lot of interest in Notre Dame right now. I think his visit to Notre Dame is somewhat similar to the one with Malachi Williams, where I think he's maybe making that visit because some other people want him to make the visit more so than his interest level.
yeah,
But we've seen Notre Dame get kids like that before. And because some kids are great Notre Dame fits, they just don't know it till they
yeah.
get here.
So they get there.
And that's kind of the key. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. There's a couple other players on the board too, Sean, that I think are good football players to consider. They're just a little bit different. And one is Paul Menke from Texas, who's going to be on campus this weekend. He's one of those guys that's kind of grown on me. I like his film. I thought he's not a knock my socks off kind of guy, but I think he's a good football player. I think he's a guy that's got some range. I think there's some talent to his game, Sean. I think he's going to visit this weekend. I'm very curious to see how that one goes. When you talk to Ryan and you talk to people that have talked with him, the one thing that he hears is like this kid is going to fit in, I think, pretty well socially at Notre Dame. He's a high academic kid.
Yeah.
He's a kid that's got interest in some other areas. He's a kid that has good speed. He plays. I don't see a lot of flaws in his game, Sean. The only thing is I just don't see any dynamic aspects of his game either. But I've had some people tell me he's got better, maybe some speed than I think. And if they're right on that, then it's a better pickup. But look, tall, rangy, athletic kid. The reason that there's 2 reasons I kind of like Paul Menke as a guy that I wouldn't be opposed to being the third safety. There's 2 reasons for it. Number 1, I love recruiting the state of Texas. And the more kids you get out of Texas, Sean, the better. And it makes it easier for the next group. But here's the second reason, and it leads to what I just said. I think Paul Menke's probably the second most natural center fielder on the board. I don't know I think DeJuan Lane maybe could, but I think DeJuan Lane is at his best coming downhill. Jalen McClain is absolutely at his best coming downhill.
Absolutely.
The other kid that I thought was a guy that could play center field was Davis Andrews. I thought he could be a center fielder. But he's not. He's probably going to be a Mormon, going on a Mormon mission now. And so, with the concern I have for Bronte and just the overall need at the position, because neither of last year's guys were necessarily center fielders, and Notre Dame doesn't need a pure center fielder. They don't just play cover 1 all day with the same guy.
Yeah.
But you do need to have that one guy that can really patrol center field, especially if you're going to play a ton of man at cornerback. And Menke's a guy that I think has the length, the range, and the speed and the instincts to be a center fielder as well. So I think that is a reason why I like him. He's a guy that, to me, I've got my eye on to say, I really want to see how this kid's visit goes. I want to see how this kid's senior film goes, because he brings a lot of tools to the table. And if he can flash a little bit more this as a senior, then I think he's a guy that could go up in the rankings. And to kind of back up what we're talking about, I think he's one of those guys. There's a lot of guys in the country that have very different recruiting profiles, and I look at them and I laugh at some of them, because I'm like, how does this one person have this kid in the top 100 and this other one has him as a 3-star? Like Jalen McClain's rankings are just stupid. Two of them have him like borderline top 100, two of them as a 3-star. Paul Menke's one of those ones when you look at On Three, they have him as the number 138 player in the country and the number 10 safety in the country.
Yeah.
Then Rivals and 247 Sports both have him as a 3-star and the number 49 safety in the country. I can see why there's a difference with him. And I get why there's a little bit of a difference with him, because it's about what you value. But to me, the fact that he can play center field, the fact that he's got some range, the fact that he's a really big time student, and the fact he's from Texas would make me say, if that's the third, I have some questions about Chris O'Leary.
Yeah.
I'm disappointed that you've missed on some of your top guys. But if you look at recruiting in two ways, one is, did you get your top guys? I'm gonna ding the safeties on that, because you're gonna miss out on a lot of your top guys if you finish with Bronte and a Paul Menke. But if you take that aside and just the other way to evaluate is just look at the three players, there's some talent in this class, if that's what it would get to. And that's why I think Paul Menke is worth discussing, because I think of the safeties on the board, he's probably the guy they have the best shot at right now. But the fact that having two guys that can play center field is the thing that kind of puts me over the top a little bit, with him potentially being a really good fit for being that number 3 guy. And I do grade him right now higher than Kennedy Urlacher, and that's been my standard all along. Yeah. You have to grade out higher than Kennedy Urlacher to take him. And I think he does. He certainly has a much higher floor.
Yeah,
I would say than Kennedy does.
The safety position, in my opinion, if we go back over the last, let's say the last decade at Notre Dame, it to me has been underrated, in my opinion. When I look back, I'm watching the 2010 game, and do you know how lucky Notre Dame was to have a combination of Zeke Mata and Harrison Smith? Like, at the time, you're saying to yourself, like, because Harrison Smith came in and played early. Mm-hmm. And just the ability he showed to play center field and the complementary way how they fit each other as safeties. And I think Notre Dame has kind of been looking for that fit. They had a unicorn, right, in safety that could play center field and come down into the box and anticipate, over the middle, and Kyle Hamilton. But who was really next to him the entire time he was at Notre Dame? So what was the last really great combination, a good combination at safety, you would say? Good combination that just played well together.
18-19 with Jalen Elliott and Alohi Gilman.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree, because I think Jalen took his game to the next level that year. I was looking at
Alohi, I think, helped Jalen a ton. And here's why I say that. Alohi's a much better athlete than people give him credit for. He's a pretty athletic kid.
That's why he's still in the NFL. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
And that he just wasn't real big.
Right.
But he was wicked smart and a leader. Jalen was a great leader because he was a former quarterback, but he was not a natural defensive back. Mm-hmm. He played a little bit of DB as a senior because that's what Notre Dame was going to have him play, but he was a quarterback most of his life.
Yeah.
I think Alohi helped Jalen make that transition, because Alohi could help Jalen with the communication and the mental part and then the film room. And then eventually, once it clicked, that 2018 safety tandem was I would argue that was the best safety tandem they had, just because, the 2011 tandem because I'm trying to, did Jamoris get hurt in 2012? I'm trying to remember what year did Jamoris get hurt in 2012 or 2011, Sean? Do you remember?
He got hurt the year they went to the championship game.
Okay, so he got hurt in 12.
Yeah, I
So
believe
then I'm
so.
going to go with the 2011 safety tandem as being the best because it was a trio. It was Harrison, Zeke, and Jamor Slaughter. Was really good. That's a close second to me, that tandem in 2018. And I know you had Kyle Hamilton in 2019,
Yeah,
but the veterans were for whatever reason they just weren't as good as a
yeah,
unit in 2019. And I don't
yeah,
know what. I still haven't been able to kind of figure out why. But to your point, I mean, they had the Elijah Shoemate and Max Redfield safety tandem in 2013 wasn't bad.
no,
You know,
they
that was
weren't.
a quality duo. You know,
Yeah,
you look at 2015, Max Redfield and Elijah Shoemate was, and you had Matthias Farley coming off the bench was a pretty good safety. So to your point, the safety position up until the last couple of years has been much better at Notre Dame than people thought. But I think they also recruited some pretty good talent there, and I think
yeah,
that's been the most disappointing thing is, Jalen Elliott's a guy that I gave a 4-star grade to. I thought he was a really athletic kid. Devin Studstill's a guy that played really well as a freshman, and he just
yeah,
didn't do what he needed to do to build on that year. That was more on him than the coaching staff. I thought he did really well. You had Alohi, who transferred in from Navy. You know, Matthias Farley was a starter in the NFL, but had trouble starting at Notre Dame.
yeah.
You know, I mean, so I think safety's been a strength. But they recruited good players, and I just don't think –
Like you
that's the issue
said,
that I have right now is I like the kids they got last year, but I don't
yeah,
think Chris O'Leary was the primary driver of getting the 2 kids you got last year, in my
well,
opinion. And
yeah,
that's a concern for me. But I
yeah,
do think this class, if they're able to put it to you like this, between Bronte, McLean, Lane, I'm going to not count Davis Andrews because, again, I just because I think the mission
the
aspect of it.
mission, yeah,
But Bronte, McLean, Lane, and Menke. And
okay,
I think if you can get 2 of those 4 in some combination, I'm gonna feel good about this safety class. It's got to get better, but
yeah,
you've at least moved the needle, in my
yeah,
opinion. And it's the other form of a gap closer that you made it better than what it was. And you get some length because last year's group doesn't bring you a lot of length. It's downhill, it's smart, it's instinctive, it's good athletes, but not a lot of length. This class would bring you a lot more length as well if you're able to get 2 of those 3. Because McLean's the only one of that group that doesn't have impressive length or impressive height.
yeah,
But if you look at Jalen McLean, I know he's only 5'11", but that dude is long. Like he is really long.
yeah,
So I even think he brings you some length. So I think safety, Sean, this is a huge month at safety. But here's the deal. To kind of get back to the purpose of all this, if you don't crush it this month at safety, then you're going to be in trouble. And if they don't blow Paul Menke's socks off this weekend and he leaves not feeling great vibes, then
yeah,
you're really in trouble. Because
yeah,
I don't think I don't feel great about where they are with DeJuan Lane or Jalen McLean. And that's
yeah,
a whole different conversation that has a lot to do with the position coach. I'm not trying to argue that right now. Right now, we're just trying to present, where Notre Dame is. We can have that conversation another day, and it needs to be had, and we've already had it a lot. But I think this next week when you've got Bronte and Paul Menke on campus is got to be, you've got to hit it out of the park with those 2
yeah,
guys.
yeah. And right now, you need the 2 safeties that you have in your class in 23 to get healthy, so they can develop over their first season and be part of that depth. Maybe the second half of the season, or helping out in some way, form, or fashion. Not that you need them, because you've gone out in the portal and help yourself, but at least they're there going into that
Yeah.
sophomore year to be impact players. If you do indeed miss out on the kids in the class you're talking about.
Now, there's one other safety that I want to talk about that's kind of interesting, Sean, and that's Marquise Gallegos. One of the questions we had was from Keith Wiegand. Brian, do you see Marquise Gallegos as a center field safety? So right now, I don't think Notre Dame is in a great spot for Gallegos. They're obviously in the game because he's taken an official visit, but I just think there's a couple other schools ahead of Notre Dame. Here's the interesting thing for me about Marquise Gallegos. I would argue that he's either the best or second best safety on the board in regard to how good he is as a high school player. I think he's an outstanding high school football player. My concern with Marquise Gallegos is the projection to the next level because he's just not real big. And that's my only concern with him right now. But as far as, the thing about Marquise Gallegos, can he be a center fielder? Yeah, he's pretty rangy, pretty instinctive. I think he's a pretty good athlete. he doesn't have the length that some of those other guys do. And that would be a little bit of the problem of having Marquise being a center fielder is he's 5'11", 6 foot. I've seen some places list him at 6'1". He doesn't look 6'1" to me. I hope he is, but he is really fluid and smooth. And but it's that lack of length that concerns me. But that kid's high school film, I mean, he might be the most instinctive, like smartest, headiest, just makes great reads. And then with really quality athleticism, he's got really impressive film. The two things about him is I just don't think Notre Dame's in a great place with him right now, but the visit could change that. And then two, I just worry about where's the upside because of the size, because he's listed at like 6 foot 160. If he ends up being bigger than that, then that's great. But he's got really impressive film. I just don't think Notre Dame's in a great spot with him right now. But he's another June safety that I would add to that board of if you can get that kid, I'd like that pickup. I would. I have right now he's a much better player than Paul Menke right now. But the difference is Paul Menke's much bigger, longer, rangier, has better speed. It's about projection. And that's why I look at Bronte, Paul Menke, guys like that who maybe aren't as good as high school football players as Marquise Gallegos, but they're better prospects than him at this point in time, is how I feel.
Yo, Gallegos, the first time I watched this film, the first thing that came to my mind is something that I always hear Malik say. Like, look for the panic when you watch film. He always tells me that. No matter what position you're watching, look for the panic. And you see this kid turn his hips and just run, high point the football. He plays too high. He's playing single high center field, like you said. And he's just patient, man. Like, even when someone puts a double move on him, coming right at him, there's no panic in his back pedal. He just trusts himself. He writes himself, and he goes and he competes. So, like you said, it's not about being disappointed in Notre Dame if they get any combination of the young men that visit in the month of June. But you know the top guys that love it to close the gap and say, yo, okay, now we're recruiting at a different level at this position.
Lastly, defensive line. Now, there's a lot of shocker. We're having a recruiting show, and there's a lot of questions about Justin Scott. Shocker. But this is a show about June visits. And as of right now, Justin Scott is not visiting in June. So we won't be talking about Justin Scott. There is one defensive lineman. So Malachi Williams was originally going to visit this weekend. I had a chance to talk with him the other day. He said that visit is off. He's working on rescheduling. I don't know if that reschedule is going to happen because, honestly, I think Notre Dame likes the three they have. The only way that they would bring in a fourth is if it's just the dude. And I think the only guy that they view as being that kind of guy on the board right now is Elijah Rushing. Now, Elijah is slated to be on campus next weekend. You know who else is going to be on campus next weekend? Logan Thomas.
Yep.
So I think there's going to be a very hard push for that group. And, you know, like there's other guys we talked about, like Brian Huff at linebacker. And I mean, there's some other guys on campus that we could talk about. It's just right now I don't view Notre Dame as really players for some of those guys, but they could always make moves. Elijah Rushing is an interesting case because depending on when we've talked, he is a guy that you think Notre Dame's got a great shot to get to where they're out of the game. And now I think they're somewhere in the middle. And with him, it's been a while since he's been on campus. The last time he was on campus was like over the winter. I think like January, something like that. It's been a while since he's been on campus. Some other schools have really gotten into a good position with him. But this is Notre Dame's chance to say, hey, look, man, you can do something special here. Because here's the thing that why I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic with him than others are with him is, Sean, is because I always get intrigued by those kids that visit that are great Notre Dame fits. Because I feel like when they get on campus, especially when there's players around and things like that, exactly.
Yeah.
And to me, Elijah Rushing is he's the best. I mean, even with all due respect to the kids that are committed, the only kid that I feel that's been a better fit for him than the last couple of years is probably Keon, right? But this is where we're in the same boat again, Sean. he's a great fit, but he's an elite prospect that everybody else is telling him this, and this about football. Does he view himself as a great fit? And that's what this visits are going to be about.
I like the fact that they're in it. I'm going to be honest. I didn't think they would get back into the race for this young man.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what transpired to put them in the middle, like you said. But I remember talking to Ryan, and Ryan's like, yeah, they're not going to get him.
Right.
And now to have the opportunity to be somewhere in the race and have a chance to once again propel yourself into the mix and get to the top of the heap. That's what that's what these visits are about, right? Closing the deal for the guys you lead for and jumping to the top of the heap for the kids that have questions. That's why you have these visits, and then you go into the fall having to close on whomever you have to close on, and your success during the season, of course, helps with that. So this is where that push starts, right here in June. And Elijah Rushing, like you said, you're not about to say no to him. Even if you have your numbers along the defensive line, that's the type of kid you take if he wants to come to Notre Dame. So I fully expect them to go ahead. I expect them to hit a home run with the young man during this visit. Now, whether or not it's enough, we'll wait and see. But I fully expect them to hit a home run with the young man during this visit.
So, Sean, let's wrap up this recruiting aspect with a look at what we believe and what we project are the 5 most important June visits of uncommitted players. And so these are the guys where we look at and say the visits that are most important to being able to close with these kids, but also the players that are most important to the success of this class. So it's a combination of those two things. So number one, Sean, we talked about it earlier. At linebacker, it's Kingston. I mean, he's the number one guy, I think, because with defensive end, Elijah Rushing is a huge one, and we'll get to him, but you've met your needs with pretty good players at that position. Without Kingston, you don't meet your needs at linebacker.
No.
And unless you're able to have a comeback with Chris Cole or close on Chris Cole, who I also love as a prospect. But again, right now, I don't think that they are right now coming into the visit. I don't feel as good about where they stand with Chris Cole as they do Kingston, which is why we're focusing more on Kingston.
Yeah.
But when I look at him as a player, he could also be the kind of ringleader type of recruit in a class too, Sean, that he could be the guy that helps you go get a Justin Scott, the guy that goes and helps you get an Elijah Rushing, that helps you close on a safety in that kind of player. I think he's also important in that regard. So that's why he's number one, because I think he's incredibly important to this class, as you stated earlier. I think, but I also think this visit is going to play a huge role in who he picks, because I do think he's very torn between Ohio State and Notre Dame, and then to a degree USC. But I think he's very torn, and when a kid's that close, the final visit can be the thing that just sways him. Are you the school that hosts him and does everything where he just leaves and he's like, yeah, that's home? That's what Notre Dame has to do with Kingston this summer. And we'll see if they're able to do it. But because Ohio State does have the last visit, which I think can get overplayed sometimes, I actually think it can actually, in this instance, benefit Notre Dame, because everybody's like, well, if it's about the June visits, well, that school's getting the last crack at it. Yeah, but what if you're able to knock it out of the park enough to where he's thinking about you the entire time he's somewhere else? How's that going to matter to him? I think that's a big part of it as well.
His film, I remember the first time I played his film for left, and the left is like, this kid plays where? And I'm like, he plays Bosco. And he's like, in California? I'm like, yeah. He's like, we play them next week. 7-on-7. So immediately he comes back after they play and he says, oh boy, this kid is the real deal, and everything you just said about this young man, I get the vibes of getting Manti over USC.
Yeah.
When you think about a kid from Bosco Prep, if you can get a kid out of California over USC and beat out Ohio State,
yeah,
that's a pretty bold statement. So I can fully understand why you have him where you have him listed on this.
And the
That's
Manti thing fits to me too, Sean, not just because they're both Polynesian.
no,
I mean, you
no,
can't ignore that,
yeah,
but it has more to do with when you just listen to him talk and you get
yeah,
interviews, you talk to people that know him. It's like this is that kind of kid that people just want to play with and play. You know, when he gets to Notre Dame, you know, he gets on you, he gets in your face, and I think that they're signing a lot more guys like that. I think Drake is that way in last year's class.
yeah,
Right, like I feel like Nolan Ziegler has a little bit of that in the 2022 class. I think Jaden Alsbury has kind of that guy in a different way because Jaden is a little bit, you know, quieter in those kind of ways. But like you're just getting some of those guys that are just smart and athletic and passionate and hard workers, and people just want to play with them. And I think Kingston brings a lot of that to the table, and he's really the only guy on the board that way that can be sort of that Pied Piper type of not just recruit, but then when he gets to school type of player. And so that's a big thing why I think that Manti comparison makes a lot of sense. I don't think he's quite the player Manti was coming out of high school, but we're not making a direct comparison as a
no, no,
player.
no,
It's
no,
more
no,
about
no,
the aspects of we had to beat some big boys for him, you had to go out west for him,
absolutely,
and then just
absolutely.
the character that he brings to the table would be
Because at that point, USC had that pipeline
right.
coming from the islands going to USC for linebackers, and so that was a huge win for Brian Kelly.
That
And
was
I
Charlie.
mean not
That was
Charlie
Charlie.
Weiss and
Yeah.
Notre Dame to get him, for multiple reasons. So the only thing I would say, well, you've talked to people. I don't know his personality, but he seems like an in your face type of kid. Like, man, I'm going to carry the banner, just like Drake.
Yeah.
Drake is Notre Dame. Drake's gonna wear Notre Dame and how he feels about Notre Dame on his sleeves. Like, you're gonna know as he plays on the field, he's gonna play with that energy. He's gonna be in your face, and he's gonna be in his teammates' face. So yeah,
Mhm.
you expressed it perfectly. B, you definitely expressed it perfectly. If that's the type of individual that he is, this is a win-win. This is a win-win-win in
Yeah.
recruiting if Notre Dame can get him into class.
Here's number 2 guy on the board, Gilby Lambert. I think this is one because there's the biggest need is the biggest reason is he's very talented.
Uh-huh.
The second reason is it's a position of a huge need.
Huge need.
And to me, and it's not O-line specifically, or it's tackle specifically.
Yeah.
He's a big recruit, and it's going to tell us a lot about Joe Rudolph's ability to really come in and shake things up. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be vitally important. Vitally important. I mean, you look at Harry Hiestan's first similar class, right? So his first class was 2013, and so he got hired in December
Yeah.
of the 2011 season. And they've got Ronnie Stanley at the end. Ed Warner did most of the work there. Coach Eastan helped finish the deal with Ronnie, but they were already in a good position there. But then you come out that first class in 2013, you get Mike McGlinchey, you get Steve Elmer, you get Colin McGovern, Hunter Bivin, and John Montelis. I was never that high on John Montelis, but you really filled up. You really got. I mean, you got your 5 guys. I mean, you're able to go out and get that class, and he only had about a month or 2 head start on Joe Rudolph. I mean, and then Hiestan's second class was even better with Quentin Nelson and Alex Bars and Sam Mustapher and Jimmy Byrne. And so we're going to need to see Coach Rudolph show that he can come in and has the chops to recruit the best players. And that's the question we don't have is can he go against the best teams in the country? Can he beat Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State for a kid like Gilby Lambert? It's great that you can identify an Anthony Knapp. That's phenomenal. That's great. If he's as good as assuming that Anthony Knapp is as good as Joe Rudolph thinks he is. I personally don't see it, but I hope that he's right. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt in this instance. But the reality is you're at Notre Dame. You should be able to go out and beat the best teams in the country for some kids. You don't have to do it for all of them. Like one of the questions that we'll answer a question like this was, why does Notre Dame always get the best players on the offensive line? Well, they don't always want the quote-unquote best players on the offensive line. It's about building a unit, a group of 5 guys that work well together. And sometimes that includes several high-ranked guys, and sometimes it means 1 or 2, and the rest are, are just good players, but you always have to be able to beat the big boys for at least a guy or two. And when you look at the 2012 class, I mean, they did that with Steve Elmer. They actually did that with Hunter Bivin. He was a pretty heavily sought after guy. 2014, you had to do that with Quentin Nelson. You had to do that with Alex Bars. 2015, you had to do that with Jerry Tillery. Now, Tillery ends up moving to the defensive line, but they had to go. They had to beat. I mean, LSU wanted them hard and all that type of stuff. 2016, you had to go in. You went into Ohio State's backyard, beat Urban Meyer for Liam Eichenberg and Tommy Kramer. 2017, you had to beat teams from all over the country to get Robert Hainsey. You had to beat all the East Coast and Big Ten powers to get Josh Lugg, and then you had to go out and beat some big time West Coast schools to get an Aaron Banks. I mean, this is Notre Dame. That's the expectation, and even Jeff Quinn did that with some kids. Where he was able to beat some big time schools for some kids. Not a lot, but some. Joe Rudolph needs to be able to show he can do that, and Gearby Lambert's the first example. On top of the fact he just plays at a huge position of need. Marcus Freeman says, look, this is what Marcus Freeman has said, and I believe him to believe this, and I believe it to be true as well. We're going to be a line-driven program. The reality is if you're going to say that as the head coach, you need to hold those two coaches more accountable than anybody you have on your staff from a recruiting standpoint. Anybody. And right now, they are doing some good things. Al Washington has had a decent bounce back year, but he's got to close well. You've got to be able to get the Justin Scotts and the Elijah Rushings. And if you're the offensive line coach, you've got to get the Gearby Lamberts. I'm cool with you taking flyers on a guy like Anthony Knapp. Harry Heastand did that with guys like Trevor Ruland. Some guys that he saw was like, hey, this guy's a guy that I like, but he's a guy that needs some work and, is taking a flyer on him. And that's okay. But you have to be able to bring in the dudes as well. You can't just be a program at Notre Dame that says, hey, we are going to go out there and we're just going to get a bunch of Wisconsin kids and develop them. You had to do that at Wisconsin. This is Notre Dame. You can, in some instances, if the kid is the right, because this is something I learned from some conversations with Coach Heastand in his years at Notre Dame. It's not always just about getting the most talented guy. And on the offensive line, you got to get a guy that fits a lot of different things. It's not just about popping on film and seeing the guy's really talented. He's got to have the demeanor, the mind, the work ethic, the attitude, the team unit-oriented first guy. Quentin Nelson was an elite, all-time generational talent, but he was a unit-first guy.
Yeah.
Right? And so he had the mentality. Other elite players don't have that mentality and would not have fit at Notre Dame. So there is that to it, but you've got to go out and find the elite players that fit that and get them. Harry did it. Quinn even did it to a degree. Ed Warner did it to a degree. He got Matt Hegarty. He got Ronnie Stanley. I mean, he got some very talented players. Joe Rudolph is going to have more years to do that, but I'm sorry. This is an offensive lineman from a private school in Massachusetts. Notre Dame should be able to get this kid. And right now, I don't think that they are. So if he's able to rebound and get him back into the fold and maybe add him to the class, that says a lot about his ability to go out there and battle. And even if you're behind the eight ball a little bit because, Coach Heastand left and then you had to rebuild that relationship, these other coaches had a year head start on you, whatever the case may be, I would say, why were you not recruiting this kid at Virginia Tech? It's a different conversation for a different day. But that's going to be an important piece of this, Sean, is it's going to tell us a lot about, okay, Joe Rudolph is that dude. And, we're going to find out if him and I'll tell you what, if him and Al Washington aren't able to close here on some of these guys, then if Marcus Freeman's going to have to stop talking about how this is a line-driven program because he says it's got to be about coaching and recruiting. Well, it's got to if you're going to say that, it has to be more true at those two positions than any other. And that's what this next month or so is going to tell us about the two line coaches, in my opinion.
I just wanted you talk about relationship and how Gearby Lambert has kind of shut things down from a communication standpoint. This goes back to last year when we originally connected with Gearby Lambert. He said it was unbelievable to get an offer from Notre Dame and an absolute honor to be targeted by a coach like Harry Heastand. So that kind of gives you the impression initially and now what Notre Dame and Joe Rudolph are going to have to rebuild or reestablish. Because I've never been a recruit, recruited at this level of any sport, but I would venture to say if you had a relationship or I was looking forward to building a relationship with someone that was pretty well established as a legend at what they do, it would be kind of a letdown to know that that person would not be at the university that I'm interested in. It'd be a little bit of a letdown, but it doesn't mean that I'm still not interested in the school, right? So the interest is there, whether or not Notre Dame's at the top or in a similar position that they were at the time where the offer went out. And he had spoken to Harry Heastan, via the conversation we had multiple times. So now this is all on Joe Rudolph, right? There's no hiding, and I don't. It's an unfortunate situation to be in, Brian, because you have a kid that was honest about Harry Heastan and his love for Harry Heastan in the school when he initially got his offer. Now, knowing that, Joe Rudolph, this is one of those, he's kind of casting a shadow in his recruitment. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. He was able to go out, and the other coaches that preceded him, they were able to go out and win these type of battles. This is what you have to do at Notre Dame. You don't have these type of battles, at Wisconsin. Maybe you have a kid
occasionally for a Logan Brown.
But
Nolan Rucci, whose brother played at your school, right?
But this is every year. Right. This is every class. You have to win these battles. And so we love Joe Rudolph. We're happy he's here, but welcome. This is the welcome in the month of June to be the O-line coach at Notre Dame.
I was asked once, why am I not as hard on Joe Rudolph as I was on Al Washington a year ago? There's a couple reasons, and I want to discuss it here again. Number one is I'm trying not to be as hard on a first-year coach as I was last year because people complained about it, and you sit back and think like, okay, I get it. I'll give the guy more time. I'll criticize and say he needs to do this, but not just crush him the way that I did Coach Washington last year. It's fair. Still going to be hard on him. But even if I wasn't doing that, it comes down to this, is I believe that recruiting an offensive lineman is way different than recruiting a defensive lineman. And we said this, relationship is, there's no position in football where the relationship is more important for a recruit than the offensive line coach. None. And that's a part of it too. That has to be factored in. The other part is that he didn't walk in the door with Keon Keeley, Brendan Vernon already committed in the class, and you led for Jason Moore and Devin Houston. Yeah. It's a little different situation. But Gearby is similar to that, though. And that's why I'm a little bit more critical of him on his decision with Gearby Lambert, not decision, on how it's going with him than Anthony Knapp versus Caleb Brewer. Because I kind of understand that one a little bit. This one, not so much. Because I think the issue with Caleb Brewer is, and again, I don't necessarily agree with it, but they don't view Caleb Brewer, or at least Coach Rudolph doesn't view Caleb Brewer as a tackle. So it's determining between which guy do you want to be more of an interior guy. Gearby Lambert has to be your priority number one at tackle. And you have to be able to go get that one done. And that's where I'm at on this one. So, but it's going to put a ton of pressure on him for next year. But I don't want to move on to next year just yet, because you still have Gearby Lambert coming into campus into this month. And if they're able to knock it out of the park, then you can make yourselves players. Number 3, Sean, Bronte Johnson visits this weekend. His visit starts on Sunday. I think it's going to go through Tuesday. We talked a lot about Bronte early. This is a huge one because you have to be able to close on him and close on him soon, in my opinion. That's what they need to do. You've got to get some momentum going to that position, and you've got to land a kid like that. And then once he commits and he's in your class and he's not worried about taking all his other visits and going to other schools, you can really, really hone in on, okay, now let's get this thing going and really get this aspect of the academic piece going to make sure that you can get him into the class. I think the more time that Bronte is committed to you, if you can get him, the better it is for you to be able to make sure that you're able to stay really on top of him and he's staying on top of finishing strong in the classroom like he's done so far as a junior. And I think that's another reason why this weekend is big. But the football part is also incredibly important. You've got to get not just a safety, a talented high upside safety, and Bronte is that, but he is the most natural center fielder, in my opinion, that they have on the board at safety. And that is a huge important piece to this whole puzzle when it comes to the safety position.
There's two ways, right, of recruiting. You don't just want kids that know the brand and want to have an offer from Notre Dame. You want kids that actually want to be here and want to be part of it and want to be part of building and buy in. You want kids that buy into the vision of Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. And Bronte Johnson, in my opinion, without taking a step onto the football field, showed his commitment to Notre Dame, which is honestly one of the separators with Notre Dame and other programs. So I know you say, I'll wait in that situation until he's enrolled. That's a pretty darn good sign that the kid can not only come to Notre Dame, enroll, but he's proven to himself that he can fit in.
Yeah.
A lot of
kids
can
do the work in the classroom.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
A big thing, especially kids from certain parts of the country or certain cities where the school districts aren't great and he's not surrounded by a bunch of great students. Hey, look, because you know how the kids like this are, Sean. There's people around him saying, hey, man, you can't do that. Or, just whatever the case may be.
Like, why are you doing all of that?
It's not like going to, where Gearby's at a prestigious private school in Massachusetts. He is at a public school in Fort Wayne. I have recruited Fort Wayne recently within the last decade. There's not a lot of we didn't see a lot of great transcripts in Fort Wayne. So for him to be able to whatever the other noise is out there, him and his support system were like, no, you are capable of this. You can do this. And that he went out and did it, Sean, I think is a great sign. And hopefully he can continue to get that done. So, that's going to be a big piece of this. Number 4, Sean, this is now where we get to some of these guys where you've already met your numbers, but these are just impact guys that you just have to be able to try to get these guys. Number 4 is Elijah Rushing. We talked a lot about him earlier. Is your class going to be incomplete if you don't get Elijah Rushing? No, it's not. But getting him does 2 things. Number 1, it adds a phenomenal talent. Number 2, it gives you protection in case you don't get Justin Scott, which is not what I want to see happen. But if you do get Elijah Rushing and Bryce Young continues to fill out, maybe Bryce Young ends up becoming that 3 technique in this class. And now Elijah is your swing end. And then maybe, Cole Mullins becomes your field end. And then Logan Thomas is a Viper. Now Elijah's the guy that can play both. And he's your dude. So you could still have a pretty darn good defensive line class if you get Elijah Rushing and don't get Justin Scott. I would be upset. I would criticize them for not getting Justin Scott, but I'd be able to sit back and say, but that's still a pretty darn good defensive line class. And then say, now you got to figure out why you lost Justin and fix it. But okay, at Coach Washington, you showed me something, right? You showed me something with getting Logan Thomas out of Texas and Cole Mullins out of Georgia and going down and getting Elijah Rushing in this class. And we anticipate them obviously getting Sean Savogliano, but no, that's a different story for a different day. But you're going to beat the top schools in the country for a 5-star defensive end from Arizona. That tells me something. And they say, well, yeah, but he's a great fit for Notre Dame. Yeah, I know. So was Keon. And look where he signed. It wasn't Notre Dame. So you still got to close the deal. I don't care how good of a fit a kid is, unless it's a kid's a fit from an hour away or 15, 20 minutes away. If it's a great fit from Arizona, you still got to put in the work. Benjamin Morrison was a great fit for Notre Dame. I don't know that he knew that right away. He had to be shown that. Christian Gray, Sean, we've talked a lot about this on the show recently. Christian Gray, 13, 14, 15 months ago, Notre Dame was trailing Ohio State and LSU. And I said this, I remember I shared this story with you. And after I had the lunch with the person who told me this, and he said, Christian Gray is a Notre Dame kid. He just doesn't know it yet. And that's why the staff wasn't worried. And it was just kind of like, well, but at the time he didn't know it yet. You still had to sell him on that. It just wasn't. You had to put in the work and get him. So Elijah Rushing in any situation, I don't care how great of a fit he is, to get him in the class requires work, and it would be a great recruitment. So that's one that is to me, he's on this list, Sean, not just because he's elite talent, but to me, him being on this list for me is more about that kind of victory that eases some of the concerns we have about Al Washington. That's the kind of victory that would be, to where like, okay, yeah, you got to finish up over here, but man, you've done pretty good. And the final piece is you get an Elijah Rushing in this class. I think it makes the sales pitch to Justin Scott a whole lot easier.
A whole lot easier, man, because he is observing classes. He is observing who Michigan is signing. He's observing who Miami signs. Yeah, he knows the players he's going to be visiting Athens with this weekend. Like, he's very well aware of the players that are going to be surrounding him in the classes of the programs that are coming after him. So if you get Logan Thomas and Elijah Rushing, very impactful.
Yes.
Very impactful.
Here's number 5. And we talked about him earlier, Carter Nelson. It's not a need. It's a pure greedy want. That's what it is, Sean. It's this kid's an elite upside player.
Mm-hmm.
He's a freaky talent, and freaky tight end talents are supposed to come to Notre Dame. That's basically what it comes down to. And, and I think it would be it would also be the first big win for Jared Parker. I think Jared Parker has impressed me in a lot of ways as the offensive coordinator recruiter, but does he have that big win as a recruiter yet? I don't think that he does. I don't think he's had big losses. He got the guy that he wanted. He wanted Jack Larson over other guys, and he got Jack Larson.
Yeah.
Jaden Riddell, I think they liked his talent, but I think the staff had some reservations about him a little bit. But this is a guy that Jared Parker has loved for a long time. He's not necessarily in need. Can you go into the backyard of Matt Rule and they're hot right now and they're picking up kids and there's a lot of buzz there? Can you beat Bama wants this kid? Georgia was recruiting this kid. Everybody wants Carter Nelson now. Can you go out there and get him? That to me says a lot because, again, I think Jared Parker's done a nice job so far, but he hasn't been in a position to really be in one of these battles. And this would be a big win for him as an OC and as the tight ends coach. So I think that's why the Carter Nelson one is a very important recruitment for me. Because if you can add a kid of Carter Nelson's caliber to be part of a 2 tight end class, that's quite a sales pitch. And I think that kid would be a great fit for what I think Notre Dame wants to do at tight end. But there's a lot of reasons that would be a huge win, Sean, and why I have him over a second, Keidron Young or, some of the other guys on the board, a Styles Prescott, some of those other guys that we could certainly put in this top 5 category, another safety, guys like that, because that kid would just be a needle. I mean, it would be kind of like, man, this offensive class is already pretty dang good, and you added that kid to it. Oh my gosh, that's going to be a lot of fun. So that's, and if you don't get him, it's not, to me, I don't necessarily wouldn't say it's a loss because I think you're good there and you're in a pretty good position with some 25 tight ends. But man, it would be a huge win. It'd be a bigger win than it would be a loss, if that makes sense, Sean, at that particular position.
Oh, it would be phenomenal. It would be phenomenal to get this kid. And like I said, the groundwork has been laid, right? So this is a chance, in my opinion, Notre Dame has a chance to really jump to the front of the line with Carter Nelson. And we know Alabama and all other programs that are sniffing around, but they have a chance to jump to the front of the line. And the groundwork that's already been laid by Jared Parker with the multiple visits out there to his home, the relationship that's established, has a really good relationship to his high school. Yeah, it has a really good relationship, just overall built up. So Carter Nelson has probably been at the top of my list and Ryan's list the first time he threw his film on. The first time he threw his film on. And then when he showed me his basketball film, I was like, okay. Yep.
I mean, you were impressed by the tight end doing windmill dunks and going between his legs and dunking?
Yeah, okay. That's different.
Yeah.
That's different. And you put that on the football field, that equates to a lot of red zone.
Michael Mayer's a stud, Sean. He ain't dunking.
No.
like that.
No, I don't think he has the dexterity
No.
to put the ball through his legs and
No,
dunk
and
it.
dunk. No.
No. But let me tell you something, man. In a different way, after only getting Cooper Flanagan at the tight end position, which we might as well be on watch because once they get Cooper Flanagan in, Cooper Flanagan, if you watch the senior film, was fantastic coming off the edge
Mm-hmm.
defensively. He probably stays at tight end. I'm just saying, you know, this staff can see certain things, and all of a sudden they make a switch. But to get a two person tight end class after one person last year, for me, was necessary. They felt like because I'm worried about the injuries, B.
Sure.
Like kids are coming back. You hope that they stay healthy, but it's to the point now with a few of them, like you just don't know. You just don't know. You want more depth. And for me, I can see both Jack Larson and Carter Nelson being on the field at the same time, adding different things to the passing game.
Yeah.
I can see Carter Nelson stretching the defense, and I can see Jack Larson going across the middle, pops, working the zones, sit down in zones, working off the edge of the line. And heck, have you seen the plays the clutch plays at the end of games
Mm-hmm.
that Jack Larson made in his junior year? If you
Jack
haven't
Larson's
seen
a
it,
very underrated player by Notre Dame.
go check out his film.
Yeah.
He made at least 3 to 4 plays in the
Sean,
fourth
we had
quarter
people in this chat
to
last
win
week talking
games.
about dropping him from the class, and I'm just like, come on now.
For what?
Yeah. Because he's ranked as a 3-star now, basically, is what I think it has to do with. But yeah, but to your the just so you understand where I'm coming from, Sean, about why I don't view it as a need is if Tommy Reese was still the offensive coordinator, I would view Carter Nelson as a need. But
Good
I think
point.
with
Good
the
point.
fact that I think they're going to go to a more balanced approach, personnel wise, more 11, more 21 and 12 and 13 will still be used, but won't be used as heavily as what we saw in from past years. Is five is enough for me. And next year you're going to have Mitchell Evans, you're going to have Elijah or Holden Stace, you're going to have Eli Raritan, you're going to have Cooper Flanagan, and you're going to have Jack Larson. You're going to have 5, and then you go get 2 in next year's loaded tight end class, and I'm okay with that. So that's why I don't think it's a must, but I also completely understand why. And this is why I've said I would understand. I would understand if the Notre Dame staff decided they wanted to take a 4th receiver instead, or a 4th safety instead of a second tight end. I get it. I just think at the end of the day, Carter Nelson's just too talented for them to say no to. I think that's what it came down. I think that there were some people somebody read, there were some people in the program that were looking at the numbers and saying, "Hey, I don't think this is going to work." But this isn't something I know for a fact. This is just me reading between the lines. I have a feeling if Jared Parker was still just the tight ends coach, they wouldn't necessarily be pushing as hard for Carter Nelson. Because I think you'd have like, hey, we need to make the numbers work here. We need to make the numbers work there. I think that now that Jared Parker is the offensive coordinator, I think he was able to kind of say, hey, we're going to take this kid. We're going to take this kid.
Got a little bit more influence in the room.
That's just my read on it. No one's told me that. That's not like intel. That's just kind of my read on the situation.
Yeah.
Just knowing how high Jared Parker is on Carter Nelson, I think I could see something like that having happened as well. Which is why there was the discussion about, are we really going to take a second tight end and all that? And Jared Parker said, yeah, we're taking one. We're taking a second tight end. There's no doubt about it. And so that's what they're going to try to do. So it makes it big. So, Sean, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to do a quick mailbag here. We do have some questions coming up. But before we jump into the mailbag, everybody, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're also someone who listens via podcast platform, make sure that you're not only subscribed to the Irish Breakdown channel, but you need to subscribe to the CFB Nation channel as well, because that's where you can find all of Lucky Lefty shows. We're going to be transitioning Lucky Lefty over to just the CFB Nation app here pretty soon as we go forward. And so if you want to continue listening to all and the numbers tell us that you are all listening to it, you're going to still find it. You're going to find on the CFB Nation app. So we're going to put that link to the where you can subscribe to it in the link below. But you want to really subscribe. Make sure that you subscribe to the CFB Nation channel app. I'm actually going to pull that up here right now, Sean, going to put the CFB Nation link for Blue Wire, which has the link to Spotify and also has the link to Apple Podcasts, where you can find both of those, and you can find the CFB Nation app on all your platforms where you can find podcasts. So go subscribe to the CFB Nation podcast app right now. Let's go to the mailbag, Mr. Davis, and if you don't mind, I'm going to pull the questions up, and I'll have you read them if you could, and then we'll just go about it that way. Sure. So we're going to start off here with my man Cuba Puig.
Thank you for the super chat, Cuba Puig. I think if we had got Chris Cole instead of Teddy Ruzak, we would have had the best linebacker class in the nation. Chris Cole is that guy.
I mean, look, Cuba, I'm super high on Chris Cole. Love Chris Cole. Don't disagree with anything you're saying. I just don't think it's a situation where it was you're not going to get Chris Cole because you got Teddy Ruzak. That's not the reality of it. I think if Notre Dame felt they led for Chris Cole and we're going to get Chris Cole, I think they would have taken Chris Cole. I don't think this was ever we were going to get Chris Cole, but Teddy committed first. I just think that they never felt they were going to get him. Again, I don't know if they would make it work, but I would try to make it work with 4 linebackers just because those kids are so good. I don't know if they're going to necessarily do that, but to answer your question, if you do have Chris Cole in a class with Kingston and Bodie Cahoon, yeah, that's one of the best linebacker classes in the country, especially in a year like this, Sean, where it's not a great linebacker year. Nationally, it's really not a strong linebacker class. But I don't think this was a either or type of recruitment. I don't think it was Chris Cole or Teddy Ruzak. I don't think that's why they took one over the other. And you know, so I agree with your stance on Chris Cole. I just don't think it was necessarily you took Teddy at the expense of now you're not going to get Chris Cole. I don't think that's the way that one went down, in my opinion.
Raymond Harton, thank you, super chat. Thank you guys for the show today. We appreciate you, Raymond.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wicked Bronco Productions, thanks for the super chat. What impact on recruiting would beating Ohio State have? Tremendous.
Yeah.
The last 2 years, MDs and Ohio State's top targets have been at this game. Ohio State has gotten over the last 4 years 30-plus guys for the ND offer. ND has only gotten 12 within OSU offer.
Well, there's a couple ways to look at it. Number one is I think big picture. Not big picture, but more specifically, I think that it could help you maybe close with a couple big name guys that aren't deciding during the season. It might be able to help you flip a Justin Scott if he commits to Miami this summer, which I think as of right now I still think could happen. Good chance of it happening. I don't think Notre Dame is going to back off of him. I don't think Ohio State's going to back off of him. I don't think Michigan's going to back off of him. I don't think Georgia's going to back off of him if he commits to Miami. I just don't think that they will. And in some ways, I kind of like the idea of Miami now being the team to beat, because for months, everybody was just hammering Notre Dame as the team to beat, and everybody was recruiting against Notre Dame. Now everybody start recruiting against Miami. Different conversation for a different day. But, maybe a kid like that could help with where I think it would have the biggest impact, Sean, is like the 25 and 26 classes. If you can get that kind of signature win, because to your point, who is the dominant program in the Midwest right now? It's Ohio State.
Yeah.
And now I still think Notre Dame is perceived by recruits as a bigger program than Michigan.
Yeah.
But if you lose another game to them and Michigan goes out there and plays well at Ohio State and maybe even beats Ohio State again, you've now slipped to third, maybe fourth at that point in time. And that's why games like that are important. You have to be, before you can become the biggest program in the country, you've got to be the biggest program in your region.
Yeah.
And right now, from a football standpoint and a perception standpoint with recruits, Ohio State is still the big dog. I don't care that Michigan beat them the last 2 years. That eventually could have an impact. But right now, Michigan was coming from so far down because of the perception of how weird their coach is, but also the fact that they were coming off a disaster of a season. Even when they were good, they were still considered like a blue-collar team. They weren't a hot team. They recruited very well in the region and all that. They weren't recruiting nationally the same way Notre Dame was recruiting nationally. Well, the more you keep losing these games and they keep winning them, the quicker they pass you. And that's where I think Notre Dame is in danger of this year. If not for Marcus Freeman being the head coach, I think they would have already passed him. I think the only reason that Michigan hasn't passed Notre Dame right now from a recruiting standpoint is because of Marcus Freeman, because the on-field results have been very in favor of Michigan the last 2 years, and they've beat Ohio State. So I think it could have a major impact on the 25 and 26 classes and helps you kind of say, hey, no, we are now the dominant program in the Midwest from a recruiting standpoint. You still have to prove more on the field other than that. I'm talking strictly from a recruiting standpoint.
Yeah.
So I think it could help you start to win some of those battles. But it's not even just the head-to-head with Ohio State, although that matters, certainly. But it's also about, some guys that you like that they don't necessarily like. I mean, that's going to be the case too, is just because Ohio State hasn't offered a kid doesn't mean that kid's not a darn good football player. Ohio State's coaches make mistakes too, especially on defense right now. So
especially at quarterback. We'll see.
I don't know what the heck they're doing.
We'll see.
Yes. That's a different conversation for a different day, but a very fascinating aspect to that whole thing.
Zach Nichols, thank you for the super chat. Push comes to shove, and you had to pick Carter Nelson, second tight end, or 3 safeties, plus Davis Andrews taking a 2-year mission.
So what's the or here? Is it meaning that I don't get Davis Andrews? I'm trying to
that's part of the 3 safeties?
Yeah.
You're taking 3 safeties, which includes Davis Andrews, who's going to take a mission.
Yeah. In that instance, I'd probably, boy, it's a tough one. Part of it is, Zach, and I'm going to kind of dodge your question, but only because I'm not quite sure what you're saying. But more so specifically to your question, Zach, is I'd have to know who the 3 safeties are. I mean, if the 3 safeties are Davis Andrews as a mission guy, and then you also get like Oliver Miles and I don't know, Marquise Gallegos, or I'd say, okay, give me Carter Nelson because at least I'm going to take the impact guy. But if 3 safeties are like Bronte and, DeJuan Lane, I'd take the safeties because it's a bigger need.
Yeah.
Even though I think Carter Nelson's probably a better player than all those guys, it's a bigger need for me. So that's a good question. I would say probably without specifics, I'd probably lean towards safeties because in my head, I'm convincing myself the 3 safeties would be, adding 2 more really quality players. Plus, you now have basically you would get a commitment from a 2026 kid. I'd go with that, but only because of need. I still think Carter Nelson's the best football player and the best prospect of any of the guys we'd be discussing there. It's sometimes though. Look, Sean, as much as everybody wants to act like, hey, look, you take the best players and you do. This isn't the NFL draft, right? I mean, at some point in time, you do have to recruit for need. You do have to emphasize, hey, we have 1 scholarship left. We need a safety. Otherwise, we can't put a roster together. Or we could take a tight end who's incredibly talented, but we're already pretty loaded there if it comes down to that kind of either or type of situation. Now, what my ultimate answer is going to be is, well, why not take all of them? Right. That would be the ideal. But if I could only take one or the other, I'd say safety because safety is a big need because you could have the best tight end in America, but you need him because you're winning every game 45-40 because you can't cover anybody. You know what I mean? So in this instance, I'd go with the safeties at that point in time. That would be my answer to that one, Sean. And Raymond Horton has another one, Sean. I think he likes your shirt. So he said, I love the shirt, Sean. Good to see you, sir.
Raymond.
Come back soon. So, yeah. Yeah, he's digging it. I wanted to bring this up, too, from Frank McCatry, one of our LSU fans on the chat. We talked about him last week, and I was like, yeah, I haven't seen Frank in a while. Actually, it was earlier this week. And Frank was in the chat today, and he said it was good to see you and I doing a show together, Sean. We don't get to do a whole lot. Frank doesn't catch a whole lot. And I asked him where he's been. He said his daughter had twin girls, and they're both healthy. So, Frank, congratulations. This is apparently the second time he's become a grandpa. So he was already a grandpa before, but now he's got twins. So he went from 1 to 3 like that. So congratulations, Frank. We're happy for you. Glad that your daughter and the babies are doing well and are healthy.
Absolutely. Why does it seem like Notre Dame can't put together a top 3 offensive line class every year? Seems like an easy home run position for Notre Dame to dominate every year.
Well, no, it's never happened. I don't know that Notre Dame's ever had a top 3 class every year. Especially in today's era. I mean, there's sometimes a recruiting class is a bridge year, a depth year for a host of reasons. And number 2, I think that what you would define as a top 3 class and what Harry Easton would define as a top 3 class are probably
different.
because a lot of people view it as, well, why aren't they going after this 5-star kid or that 5-star kid? And you're like, well, because the Notre Dame offensive line coach doesn't think that that kid is better than this other kid or doesn't fit as well. And this is something that fans continue to miss, in my opinion, when it comes to offensive line recruiting. You have to look at it as the whole, not the individual parts, because you and I have seen offensive lines that had good individual players or great individual players that weren't great lines. And we've seen lines, and Clemson did this in their first 2 years they played in the championship game. Neither of those teams had any great individual offensive linemen, or even really good offensive linemen. But as a unit, they were very good.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and I thought one year they outplayed Alabama's line, who had a lot of great individual players. So it's about putting a group together. And, hey, we have this here, so we need this kind of player here. Yes, this guy may be retired, but our need is this kind of guy. And so that's kind of the reality of it. But I mean, look, I don't know how you can look at what Notre Dame's done the last decade recruiting the offensive line, and, a year here, a year there, certainly. But I get this a lot. And, look, Notre Dame's recruited the offensive line position pretty freaking incredibly well the last decade.
Yeah.
Now it's up to Joe Rudolph to continue that tradition. That's going to be the key, in my opinion.
Look, man, I tell you all the time, if I'm an NFL scout, I'm not going to Alabama games looking for offensive linemen. Mm-hmm. Show me the proof where Alabama offensive linemen have gone to the NFL and panned out.
Not even close to as many as Notre Dame's.
Show me the proof. Now I'll definitely go to Kinnick Stadium on a Saturday afternoon. Please show me the Iowa offensive lineman. Please show me the Notre Dame offensive lineman, because their NFL resume is long and illustrious for years. How they are developed. Wisconsin as well. How they are developed to end up being better in the NFL than your Alabamas, than your Auburns, where they just get everyone on the offensive line really big and just move you around. That's what they do. They bully you. And then they go up against other big guys in the NFL with lack of technique, and they get their butts kicked, and the next thing you know, they're gone from the Raiders, and the Chicago Bears are picking them up after they were first-round picks. What does it mean that you were a first-round pick if you can't get to the second contract and you eventually get released? That's why I didn't understand. Well, I take that back, because you have to take him at his word. If Caden Proctor truly chose Alabama because he wanted to win instead of going to Iowa, fine.
And some kids just want to get away from home. Not everybody wants to stay close to home.
Yeah, right? But he absolutely was committed to the right program to be an NFL offensive lineman.
Agree.
If that's what he wanted to be, the best lineman he could be, he was committed to the right program.
If he wants to be drafted higher, maybe be at
Absolutely.
Alabama. But
Absolutely.
I agree with
Absolutely.
that. I agree with that. Yeah, it was an interesting one. And I wonder how much all the turmoil going on at Iowa played into that as well.
It might have played a part.
That could be part of
some of the stuff.
Yeah, it could be part of it as well.
Which of the 2024 halfbacks does Notre Dame have the best shot at now? And who do you think they ultimately sign, if anyone?
So I think that they have the best shot with Keidron Young and Xavier Robinson, and I think they will get one of those two guys. I'm pretty confident they'll get one of those two guys. Which one that'll be, we'll have to see how the next month or so, the next couple weeks, I should say, transpire. But I think they'll get one of those two guys. I'm confident Notre Dame's going to get a second running back in this class. I'm just not sure which of those two guys it's going to be. I think those are the two. And look, Notre Dame liked Anthony Carey a lot. I don't think Anthony Carey liked Notre Dame as much as people saying, like, well, they moved on from him and all that. I think the reason they moved on from him is because he wasn't as interested in them as they were in him.
Yeah.
Not because they don't think he's a really good football player.
Yeah.
But I think they'd be perfectly fine and happy with either Keidron Young or Xavier Robinson. I personally prefer Keidron Young. I think he's a better player, much better player. But Xavier Robinson's a good football player as well.
Yeah.
So he'd be a nice complementary player where Keidron becomes your guy. He is your top back.
Man.
Yeah.
Look.
He's a dude.
That's the dude, right? Yeah. That's as simple as that. That's the dude. That's another position. Or we already talked about it a little bit earlier. Dylan McCullough has established himself and put himself in that room and position to go out there and get dudes. You know, and there it is. He already has one in the fold.
Mm-hmm.
Aeneas Williams is just one of those do everything, all purpose backs. And Keidron Young is just that man. He just strikes me, and I'm looking at his film. I would love to see this young man up close and personal just to see his thighs.
Mm-hmm. You talking about Keidron or Xavier Robinson?
Keidron Young,
yeah.
Just to see his legs. Because on his film, he looks like he has some really stout legs. And for him to have that much breakaway speed and power that he runs with, it's an impressive combination.
I'm gonna read this one, Sean, because it's more of a question for you than it is for me. This is from Week Zero Productions, formerly Wicked Bronco Productions. He says, how much impact does Justin Scott's mom have in his recruitment? My read is she prefers Notre Dame. He wants Miami because of the flash and NIL. Why does anyone want to go to Miami when they got blown out by Middle Tennessee State and went 4-8? Shaking my head. They went 5-7. So just to be accurate, they did go 5-7. But yes, they did get blown out by Middle Tennessee State. I will say one thing. Y'all do know South Beach is down there, right? I mean, like, let's not act like there's not any reason why an 18-year-old might want to go to Miami, right? Okay. But other than that, Sean, could you address this question?
Well, his mom is we've talked about it, who his mom is, and it's going to be very difficult to pull him out of the Midwest. And part of that reason is because of his relationship with his mom. So, yeah, she's very much part of his recruitment and his thought process and his recruiting. I push back a little bit. This is what angers me about Justin Scott, right? The immediate NIL flash thing when it comes to Miami. And for me, it reeks a little bit of a lot of things, and I won't even go into it. How about Miami staff is just doing a better job than your Notre Dame staff? And he has a better relationship with the D-line coach, or he has a better relationship with the coaches right now, or they've grown a relationship and developed a relationship that no one saw coming. There's a lot of things that can draw a young man to have interest in a school that he really didn't have interest in. Yes, first of all, he was going down there on a spring break trip. That is the thing that really opened the door. He was actually going down there on a spring break trip. Miami got to him, asked him to visit during that trip, and things went from there. So it was happen circumstance. They got into it, and they tip your cap, man. Miami has done an incredible job of recruiting the young man and making him feel special. That's what you're supposed to do as a staff.
I think I'm going to agree with you, but push back on it to a degree. I'm curious how you're going to feel about this one. My issue is not – so here's what I have said about this thing. Mm-hmm. My problem is similar to what you're saying, is that because you've gotten outworked and you've got out-recruited, you allowed the flash and the NIL to become a factor. That's the problem. Because once you allow that staff to outwork you, to build the better relationship, to do a better job recruiting you, to get – I mean, why is Miami sending 5 coaches to his high school and Notre Dame's not doing that? It's so much easier for Notre Dame. Once you do that, then don't get mad when Miami uses their assets that they have to sell their program, because they can't sell playoff appearances. They can't sell, hey, we've produced X number of this. They can say that sort of about the defensive line, because they did have 2 first-round draft picks in the defensive line a couple of years ago. Yeah. But the point is you allowed them to even get into the conversation where, had you not done that, the NIL and the flash would not have mattered. And so, yes, I do think the flash of Miami and South Beach and all that stuff.
Okay, I was about to ask, what's the flash?
Well, South Beach, Miami, the U, all that stuff.
That U stuff doesn't mean anything. That pitch is
hold on. It may not mean what it meant 10 years ago, but it's not something that you completely ignore. The fact that he's going to have this is what. Hey, I got to get coached by Hall of Famer. The point that I'm making is whatever the factors are that are leading to Miami right now, it is your fault that it got there, because you allowed yourself to get outworked by Miami. You should have had this kid. We've said it in a long time. This kid should have been in Notre Dame's class a long time ago. I'm not talking about January. I think Marcus Freeman made the right decision in January, not letting him make that decision and still taking visits. Hey, look, you want to take visits? Go take the visits.
Yeah.
But what we have said, Sean and I have said, is he should have been committed to you last summer. That's when he should have been committed to you. And if he's in the class, it's not like Keon. Yeah, he's a 5-star though. Yeah, but he's not a 5-star from Tampa, Florida. He's a 5-star from Chicago.
Yep.
It's a different animal. You allowed Michigan to get into this conversation. You allowed Georgia to get into this conversation. You allowed Miami to get into this conversation. You allowed a kid who'd never really been out of Chicago that much to go down to Miami and get impressed with everything that's about Miami. That's on you. So my whole point is, I think I cannot sit there and say, and I don't think we can sit here and say that all of those things aren't factors. The tradition, the flash of South Beach and what South Beach looks like compared to Chicago or South Bend or Ann Arbor, right? All those things are part of the conversation, but those are all a byproduct of the fact that this kid built up enough trust with this coaching staff and felt enough love and respect from this coaching staff and felt wanted by this coaching staff that he even made the visit in the first place with the thought of, could I see myself going here? That's on you, Notre Dame. That's the whole point. And so it comes back to the premise of he's not looking at Miami because of the flash in the NIL. He's looking at Miami because of the relationship, and that's allowing the flash to be impactful. And that's where this conversation needs to be, in my opinion. And that's where we often miss it, to where, and it annoys me that we always sit here and say, every kid that looks at a school that's not Notre Dame, it's because of NIL. NIL is this boogeyman that we've created now, that every time we miss a kid, I'm going to tell people until I'm blue in the face, Sean, you know exactly who my sources are when it comes to why Keon Keeley picked another school.
Yeah.
And no matter what I tell people, they're still going to say, hey, look, I pay money to be on your site. I watch your show every day. I know that you're connected, but I'm not going to believe you in this instance because I've convinced myself that it was NIL related.
Yeah.
Right. And some kids it was. Some kids it absolutely. You can't tell me that Peyton Bowen wasn't influenced by NIL. He absolutely was. But it wasn't only that. It was other factors as well. I don't blame Notre Dame for that. There are certain kids. They had no shot at getting Jaden Rashada because that is an NIL kid. That kid was going to take the highest dollar amount
up front.
You know, and there are kids like that.
Yeah.
But not every kid is like that. Not every I was going to say something that's going to get me in trouble. Not every skill player is that way. Not every Southern kid is that way. Not every 5-star is that way.
Yeah.
Some are, some aren't. You got to find the kids that fit what you're trying to do and then make sure that you get them. And don't get to the point where you allow these schools to get into the conversation. Because to Wicked's point, why in the world is a 5-7 team even able to get into the conversation with a kid like Justin Scott? Because you allowed it to happen as Notre Dame. And that's what it comes down to for me.
Let's be honest, man. When Mario Cristobal is not a slouch at recruiting. He's known as a darn good recruiter. Alonzo Highsmith is the point man coming after you. Jason Taylor is a Hall of Famer. He's your position coach coming after you. And they're selling you. I know for a fact this is the pitch. The U was started when a defensive tackle from Chicago signed with Jimmy Johnson.
Who was that? Jerome Brown?
Russell Maryland.
Russell Maryland, okay.
From Whitney Young High School.
I'm sorry.
And
the U started before that. The U started with Howard Schnellenberger, but I get your point. Yeah.
But that was like...
That's their selling point.
That's their selling point. And you're going to be the same linchpin from Chicago as the same position.
Which is absurd, by the way, that Notre Dame is losing that battle, Sean, because Notre Dame could point to how many All-Americans. But that's the whole point, though, Sean, that they are losing that freaking battle. You know what I mean? But you just said it, though. The U is a part of it. Yeah. But they're selling. I mean, it's Mario Cristobal's part of that. Alonzo Highsmith is part of that. Jason Taylor played for the Dolphins forever. But again, it should have never gotten to this point where that stuff mattered.
What did you say yesterday so eloquently? Every coach lies.
No,
they're recruiting.
Absolutely.
That's the job, to sell. That's the job, to sell kids. And you know, and look,
Yeah.
this is ultimately this is my point. We can go back to the 2016 season and say, why did any kid in 2016 sign with Notre Dame coming off that season? Why? And that ended up being a highly successful class.
Yeah, because that'd be the
That's
2017 class with,
exactly.
I don't know, Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah, Robert
Absolutely.
Hainsey, Aaron Banks. I mean, that was a pretty darn good class.
You know,
Pretty darn good class.
they have a good staff. They've assembled a really good staff. That's what they've done. And it seems like finally they have the support of the administration to get
Right.
things back rolling. So that's where it's at. I think the coaching staff closed the gap on Notre Dame. And then when you throw in the weather, heck yeah, it's a plus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Their NIL collective has gone through some things recently. So I don't even know if that's really a positive.
Yeah.
Because I would tell the young man they were supposed to have Jaden Rashad.
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
You know?
And look, I'm going to flat out say, Sean, Al Washington has not done a good job of this recruitment. At times he has. But look, here's the deal. I have said this before. You do not get a 5-star kid with only the defensive line coach. Isn't this the reason we defended Mike Elston for years when he would not get big-time recruits? Because, hey, the D-line coach can't do it all by himself. When you're going to recruit big-time players, you've got to have a head coach and a coordinator the part of it as well. I think and you have mentioned this before, Al Washington's not done a good job on this. Big reason that they're even in the game is Marcus Freeman. End of the day, it's not just Marcus Freeman is the reason why Notre Dame is in this with Justin Scott still. Al Washington's not done a good job. He's picking up a little bit. But the problem that I have is this shouldn't just be Al Washington. This is on Al Washington. This is on Al Golden. You should have a much more aggressive approach to this kid. I think to a lot of degree that they took this kid for granted. They took his recruitment for granted. They just assumed Catholic school kid, he's going to want to come here. And I think that was a mistake. But I think that it's not just Al Washington. It's also Al Golden. Those both of them have not done what they needed to do to get this kid into class. Now, it's not too late. Sean, I know you're still more optimistic than I am. I think the thing that you and I agree on is I don't really care where the kid commits this summer, especially if it's to a Southern school.
Yep.
I still don't know. I still have my doubts about whether or not he's going to I don't care who he commits to. I still think at the end of the day, he's going to end up in a Midwestern school. My only thing is I don't know that if Notre Dame would be the best one in position in the North.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Now there's time to fix it, but we'll have to see. But look, guys, we could spin it in a lot of different ways that he's visiting all these other schools, but not Notre Dame. But I'm not going to do that because the only way that spin would make any sense is if all schools he was visiting in June, Sean, were out of the region. If he was going to USC, Oregon, Miami, and Georgia, I could say, look, this is smart by the family. They can go to Ohio State and in Michigan and whatever in the fall. They can take a day trip. It's a cheaper trip. They're going to use these officials in June to go to places the kid's never been to or to go further away where he can't just take an unofficial visit. But he's taking officials to Ohio State and Michigan this summer.
Yeah.
And that's where it just becomes, I can't spin that. Not that I would spin it anyway. I shouldn't say spin, but I could understand it and maybe explain it and justify it. You can't. So they got a lot of work to do. I think the thing that helped them is – go ahead, Sean.
I follow the crumbs with a young man. Michigan was his leader because of the relationship with the coaching staff.
Mm-hmm. Seems to be a theme.
And the things he pointed out. Next thing you know, here comes Marcus Freeman.
Right.
All of a sudden, relationship. Notre Dame becomes a leader. He puts things off. Out of nowhere, Miami jumps up. What do? They build a relationship. So you can talk about flash and NIL at the core of this thing. This young man is about relationship. Yep. That's what moves him.
That's been the one consistency with all the reporting you've done on him. which school he favors has changed and all that stuff has changed because that's recruiting. That's one thing that's always been consistent is the relationship is going to mean more to this kid than anything else. And if you think this kid is going to pick Miami because of Flash and NIL, you're misguided. Are they factors that gained his attention? Sure. Wouldn't it for you when you were 18? Sure would have for me when I was 18. But at the end of the day, the decision is going to come down to the relationships, the trust. And that's what it boils down to.
They know, Brian. Miami knows how big the obstacle of getting him out of the Midwest is. They know.
Mm-hmm.
They're having people literally call him that went to Miami from the Midwest to say, yo, this is the reason you should do it.
Yeah.
They know.
Still outworking Notre Dame on this one.
And it's like, man, look. Yo, didn't we just have a Hall of Famer from the Chicagoland area? Hey, I need you to make a call.
They got isn't Chris Zorch a college football Hall of Famer?
Yes.
And they got two. They got two like that, Sean.
Yes.
And that's the thing that's really freaking annoying about it. It's like, but it comes down to what I've said is I think to the degree they took the kid for granted, in my opinion. That's what I think it boils down to. But it's not over yet. And that's the thing. There's time to rectify it. And I do believe some people on the staff are working to rectify it. And I just don't know if enough are.
I tell people don't overreact. Because I think a lot of people are overreacting because Miami is doing what they have to do. Miami has no shot if they don't go over the top. Like if Miami had just approached this thing, we're just going to
the way Notre Dame has.
Yeah, if they knew they didn't have a shot. Miami has to be over the top. That's why you see everything connected to Miami college football with a social media account, posting birthday pictures, posting other pictures for significant or have a great weekend, Justin Scott. It's collective. Like we have to do the most to get his attention and keep his attention and to get him to leave the Midwest. This is what we have to do. Georgia doesn't have to do that. Even though it's Athens, Georgia, and it's not as far away as what Miami, they got two banners that they can hoist up. They have
a bunch of first-round draft picks they can point to, right?
Yeah.
The whole thing is, Sean, and we'll move on to some other questions because we've talked a lot about this. But at the end of the day, the simple fact of the matter is you are correct. Miami is doing what they have to do. Absolutely. But that's exactly why Notre Dame should have been doing the same thing. And if they did, we're not even having this conversation. And that's the frustrating part about all of it. This all boils down to however you want to spin, whether it's the Flash or NIL or the U or whatever else, what other side factors you want to make. At the end of the day, other people are outworking Notre Dame. Simple as that. Other people have made him feel like an even greater priority sooner than Notre Dame did. And now Notre Dame's playing catch up in those regards. Other people are putting more of their staff involved. I think Chad Bowden's working his butt off on this one. I think Al is hit or miss. He's like kind of schizophrenic as a recruiter. There's times we talk to people and they're like, oh, yeah, he talks to me all the time. And then there's other times like, yeah, and then talk to him. It's odd, to be honest with you. And it's strange. And Marcus Freeman's trying to recruit everybody.
Right.
Where's your D coordinator? That it just comes down to all this stuff. You're getting outworked, and that's the simple fact of the matter. And if you lose this kid, it's because you got outworked. Simple as that. But at the end of the day, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and signing days until December.
And that's baffling. Outside of Justin Scott, that's baffling for any big-time recruit because you don't have NIL to fall back on at the forefront. Like, you should work harder than any staff with these big-time recruits because that's what you have to do. That's the vibe you should have. Until we start winning at a higher level, it can show banners, it can show college football playoff wins and wins over USC and Caleb Williams and Ohio State. This is what we have to do. We have to work our tails off collectively, not just a few of the coaches. Collectively as a staff, everybody has to work their tail off.
All right, let's get to some more here, Sean. So we got to wrap up here somewhat soon. Andre Tonsel says, if Notre Dame wins big this year, I believe Notre Dame could get those top 100 players to take notice that can come to Notre Dame to be developed and get an excellent education, plus get the NFL. Your thoughts? I mean, Andre, this is something Sean and I have talked about for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, Mark, and where did we get it from? The head coach. He said it when he was the D coordinator. We got to show kids that can not only get an education, but that we can develop for the NFL and that we can compete for championships. I mean, absolutely. Look, Lou Holtz didn't put together top number one recruiting classes 3 years in a row in 86, 87, and 88 before he won a title. It started in 90, 91, 92. It came out. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't have great classes because he had talent to win a championship, but he didn't start truly dominating on the recruiting trail till he won. So absolutely, they have to start having some success here. A couple others I want to get to here, Sean. This one from Mike Reddy. Last year, Notre Dame signed 70% of their official visitors that they push for. Do you think Notre Dame will have a higher or lower percentage this year? Sean, I'm going to say lower because I think they got so many kids early that they're pushing for a larger number of kids to fill a smaller number of spots. And so I think that's going to be kind of the thing for me that I look at. Like last year, when you look at the Notre Dame commits, like the kids that visited last spring, I mean, a lot of the kids that ended up committing weren't committed yet by the time we got to the summer. So, I mean, if you look at last year's commits, where were they numbers wise at this time, Sean, last year? So they had 1, 2, 3, 4,
They were at
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, be 11 and 12 with Keon and Peyton. So you had 12 kids committed last year. You've got 16 now.
Yeah.
And so I think just a larger percentage of the kids are going to are committed before the officials than last year. So your smaller number of players, your larger pool of players to fill a smaller number of spots. So I think just inherently that's going to make the percentage lower.
So are we counting total visitors or just the uncommitted visitors?
Well, I mean, look, every committed kid is going to take an official visit, right? And so to me,
that would be,
yeah. I mean, his numbers kind of seem to show like he's taking every committed kid, but look, I think that that's not the way that I would look at it. I would look at it as going into the official visit period. What are the number of uncommitted spots that you have, and what are the number of kids you're bringing in?
Yeah,
that's the way I look at it. You know,
I would say less. I think right now, based upon I was just looking at the list, I think they have 29 visitors coming in right now,
and it'll probably be more. Yeah,
it'll probably be more, but 29, and I don't think the percentage would be 70%.
If you're going to count all the commit. Well, the other thing too, Sean, last year's a lot of kids that were coming on officials you knew you were going to get or felt pretty good about getting. So you didn't need to bring in, 5, 6, or 7 receivers last summer. You kind of knew who you wanted and you brought them in, and so I would say probably lower would be my guess, but it's just more indicative of where they are entering the visit process. They kind of knew who they were going to get last year at this point in time.
Right.
All right, let's see here. Michael says, fast forward to 2025 on offense. What are numbers currently looking like at receiver, running back, and tight end? And what names at those positions does Notre Dame have a real player in his recruitment? Thanks, Brian and Sean. Michael, it's a little too early for me to dive into most of those positions. But I'll go here with you. I'll tell you a couple top targets on offense that I know for a fact they really want. They want Deuce Knight at quarterback. They also love KJ Lacey. They love Taylon Taylor's their top receiver target. I mean, they love that kid. They want that kid bad. At tight end, I think they like James Flanagan a lot. They like Nate Roberts a lot. And I think there's a group of people that are very curious to see what Marshall Pritchett does at camp next week, because he's going to be at camp working out next week. Offensive line-wise, Owen Strebig's a big-time must-get for them. Avery Gack is one. Those are 2 names to keep an eye on. It's super early, though. I mean, you talk about who they're going to get, super early. And I want to see how the summer goes first. But those are some early names to know on offense. Get down to a couple more here. We got one from Anthony Solomon. Sean, he says, thank you, Anthony. He says, thanks for the great show. Good to see Sean back on the program. People keep thinking like for some reason you're banished. Like look, guys, the whole thing is, number one, Sean's has a busy season. but their focus has been on building up Lucky Lefty. There's no Sean hasn't been fired, or there's like I think people like there's this problem. Lucky Lefty is part of CFB Nation. CFB Nation is part of Irish Breakdown. It's one big happy family. But the focus has been on they got to do what they got to do, because normally when Sean's going to come on a show, he has to either not do the Lucky Lefty show or cut it short. Mm-hmm. So to come on with us, it impacts the Lucky Lefty show. So the focus is on you go do this. Sean and I had this conversation. You go focus on this. Let's build this up. We got to really push to get the subscriber numbers up for CFP Nation. That's his priority, and our priority is on Irish Breakdown. But that does not mean that Sean's not still part of. Look over his left shoulder. Y'all see that right there over his left shoulder, right? So you can watch Sean every single day. What? It's so yeah, but all good. But it's because people love you, Sean. It's because they love you, and I think they like it when you and I do shows together.
Absolutely.
So. All right, here we go. Let's get a couple more of these as we get out of here. Bailey Bratt says, in the rare case that Notre Dame lands rushing but misses on Scott, I'm going to find it hard to criticize Al Washington, just being honest. I'm still going to be able to criticize him because you should have had both. The best teams get both, right? I mean, I'll say, look, yeah, he did a really nice job recruiting the edge this year's class. But where's the big boys to compete up the middle?
Yeah.
Right? Sean Sevillana is all you got? You can rush the quarterback, but you can't stop anybody from running on you because you don't have anybody in the middle. So, actually, I mean, look, I'll give him a lot of praise for getting those edge players, Sean. But I'm almost going to kind of be like, why didn't you put the same work in with Justin Scott that you did with those other guys? Do it all, right? That's what the best teams do. We did this for years at Notre Dame. Well, but this guy got so-and-so. Let's not criticize him for not getting that guy. He should have got both. That's what Georgia does. That's what Ohio State does. That's what Bama does. Oh. Ohio State didn't just get Brandon Ennis. They didn't just get Noah Rodgers. They didn't just get Cardinal Tate. They got all of them. That's what Notre Dame needs to do with the defensive line. And it's the head coach said it. We are a line-driven program. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're going to do that, then you need to get the 5-star kid that lives an hour and a half down the street. Who wanted you? He wanted you. You didn't have to convince him to like you. You allowed other people to convince him to like them. That's the difference. And that's a Notre Dame problem. I'm going to get to the I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. I did want to answer this question here, Sean, from Coleman Smith. It says, Brian, if they get Nelson, why is Notre Dame taking two similar players at tight end with the same skill set? Also, which one is the better blocker? I do not view Jack Larson and Carter Nelson as similar skill sets at all. At all. I view Carter Nelson as a Tyler Eifert type, and I view Jack Larson as a Nick O'Leary type. Those are two very different tight ends. No. Being able to line up in the slot and flex out and do all that does not mean your skill set's the same. Because Michael Mayer did a lot of those things, and his skill set's nothing like Carter Nelson's. They're very different players. Michael Mayer was used outside in the slot a bunch, just like Kyle Pitts was. They're not the same kind of player. Yeah. So Sean, I don't think their skill set is at all. Jack Carson's a great route runner, great ball skills, shorter, stocky, has a lot of blocking potential. I actually think Jack Larson has a chance to be a pretty darn good blocker when it's all said and done. I agree. It wouldn't shock me if he's a Tommy Tremble type of undersized, kind of powerful blocker. I think Carter Nelson's a pure, fast, vertical playmaker in the pass game that's going to do two completely different things. Your 12 personnel packages are going to look very different. Your routes you're going to use Jack Larson for are going to be very different than you use Carter Nelson. So I don't necessarily agree with the premise that they are similar skill sets. I don't see a lot of similarities between Carter Nelson and Jack Larson, Sean. What say you about that?
Other than ball skills.
Yeah. Jack Larson's ball skills. Jack Larson can go up and get it, man. In traffic, over the top of people. He has some really, really next level ball skills. Yeah. He is it's funny. I don't know where this sort of this anti-Jack Larson movement has come from in Notre Dame circles. It has to be recruiting rankings. We've had multiple people in this chat say, well, you should process him out and take Jaden Riddell. I'm like, no. First of all, I don't like doing that, period. We've established that. But, it's strange. Yeah. This is what happens when you commit early. you almost kind of get taken for granted a little bit.
Yep.
So that's I'm gonna answer that one. How we'll answer that one. So I will finish with that one. I think that was a good question from Coleman. We'll finish with that one. We do got to wrap up, folks. Before we leave here, look, Tommy Tremble is undersized for a tight end. He's 6'3", 240 at Notre Dame. That's undersized for a tight end. Anyway, it's always got to be that one comment at the end that just always gets me when we're about to leave. And before we leave, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Do me a favor, before you do anything else, take 60 seconds to click on the link that I'm going to put here at the bottom of the chat right now. Click on that link, and whether you're an Apple person or a Spotify person, subscribe to CFB Nation. Okay, so definitely do that. Subscribe to CFB Nation, so that way we are not. Marshall said it wasn't me this time, right? No, it wasn't. We're good today, man. You've been on your best behavior today, so we appreciate you. But folks, I just put the link in the description bar, in the chat. That you can just click on that and just subscribe to one of those. It'll literally take you 15 seconds. Okay, so I know what our numbers were today. I really hope that you all will do this for us. Click on that. Go subscribe to CFB Nation so you can get all of the Lucky Lefty podcasts, Sean. We really need to help us to build that subscriber base up. So go to it right now. I promise you, folks, 30 seconds at the most is all it's going to take for you to hit the subscription and turn the notifications on for the podcast app. You guys are going to do a show tonight. We're going to have IB Nation Sports Talk is going to go live at 6:00 Eastern time. Sean, what time are you guys going live tonight on?
Probably around 8:00. 8:00
Eastern.
Yeah.
So y'all are going to get back shows today. You got Sean and I doing the recruiting show today. 6:00. We're going to have the IB Nation Sports Talk show. Once that wraps up, you'll have a little bit of time to go get some dinner, and then it is off to Lucky Lefty. So check that out. So, folks, I'm serious. Do me a favor. Click on that link I just put in the subscription bar and go sign up for the CFB Nation podcast app. You're definitely going to want to do that to make sure that you get all the Lucky Lefty shows, all of the CFB All-America shows, and all the other things that we have planned to add to our package for CFB Nation this summer. For Sean, I'm Brian. Thanks, everybody, for being with us today. Mace K says it. Join the message board. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Leave a 5-star review. Visit the IB store for the best merch. And as always, go Irish.